the field of research, innovation, and development. We expected United Kingdom research, UK research, and the innovation leaders to provide insight on R&D and infrastructure on the innovation and implementation of the policy and strategies on their country. And the main mechanism to reach the impact of research and innovation on the ground in a way that contributes to the supporting effective cooperation between the Kingdom and the British in this vital field, and also help in the making strategic policy and promote the investment on the research finding. Once again, thank you, and all this, thanks all the speakers and organizers and wish you all the best in the workshop. Peace upon you all, and thank you.
Thank you so much, His Excellency, for making time and for your deeply inspiring words about research and innovation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's exciting to hear about the Vision 2030, and hopefully it shall be our ambition today to really embrace your ambition, your vision, in the true spirit of our country's innovation relationship. Again, thank you for making time to welcome us. Thank you. Next, ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed guests, we'll hear from Her Majesty's Ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Mr. Neil Compton. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us in person, but he has sent us a video address. So we'll play that now.
Good afternoon. I'm Neil Crumpton, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to everyone joining the Senior Leadership Workshop today on Research and Innovation, Insight into the UK Framework and Ecosystem Activation. So my special thanks go to Dr. Mohammed Al-Saderi, the Vice Minister for Universities, Research and Innovation, and his team from the Ministry of Education for organising the event today. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to the team at the Knowledge Transfer Network UK for arranging today's excellent programme. Today's event is designed to offer senior colleagues from the Saudi research and innovation community an opportunity to hear about the UK's research and development landscape and the infrastructure that enables effective collaboration. This two-part series of virtual workshops sees key UK research, development and innovation champions sharing knowledge and reflecting on lessons they have learned about strategic policy making and investment decisions. I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers today from Knowledge Transfer Network, Research England, Innovate UK and Queen's University Belfast. I've seen during my year in Saudi Arabia how much progress the country has made in research and innovation in their drive to modernise their economy. And I know from discussions with the Minister of Education, Dr. El Sheikh, and his colleagues that Saudi Arabia is overhauling its research ecosystem to help realise its ambitious Vision 2030 programme. We in the UK are keen to work with you in these collaborations. It's a very exciting time for the bilateral relationship. We have an old historical relationship but a very modern partnership. And both our governments are under instruction from our leaderships to try and thicken our strategic partnership. But only governments can do so much. In the end, what really makes a difference is people-to-people links and academic-to-academic links and links between researchers. We had, of course, hoped for these workshops to be face-to-face. However, because of COVID-19, we've all had to change the way we live, work and collaborate over the past 12 months. I think this has presented challenges, but it's also opened up new opportunities. We've all seen how research, technology and innovation have played a crucial role in our global response and enabling us to build collaborations by being more closely joined up virtually. It's been fascinating for me to see how Saudi Arabia's efforts on adapting itself to distance learning and education have come off. In conclusion, I'd like to thank our own UK Science and Innovation Network staff for organising today's event and for their work to promote this kind of collaboration, as well as my colleagues at the British Council for supporting this. So I wish you all well. I hope you have a productive session today. Good luck.
That was Her Majesty's Ambassador, Mr. Neil Compton, with his very encouraging word as well. to underpin really the tone of our workshop today, to further explore opportunities for collaboration. I'm truly delighted that we've been joined by so many colleagues from Saudi Arabia, in particular Professor Nazir Al-Ghili, Deputy Minister of Research and Innovation at the Ministry of Education, and so many of the excellent presidents of the Saudi universities, vice presidents for research and innovations, deans, leaders, and research and development in universities. You're all most welcome. We have quite a packed agenda for today, but first and foremost, I'd like to invite Dr. Hamish McAlpine, Head of Data and Evidence at Research England, who will share with us a keynote on research funding in knowledge economies. So Hamish, over to you, Hamish.
Thank you, Niju, and welcome to everyone joining us here this morning in the UK and just in the afternoon in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And may I say that I'm very pleased and honoured to have been asked to take part in this event. And I must say thank you to the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia, the British Embassy in Riyadh, and the Knowledge Transfer Network for their excellent organisation of this event. And hopefully you can now see my slides on the screen. So my name is Hamish McAlpine. I'm the Head of Data and Evidence at Research England, which is part of UK Research and Innovation. And today I'm going to attempt to briefly set the scene for today's session, particularly reflecting on UK initiatives to build and drive the success of knowledge-based economies. So firstly, a word about UKRI, UK Research and Innovation. UKRI was created in 2018, but it has a much longer history than that, with the oldest research council, the Medical Research Council, being formed in 1913. But in 2018, the 7 research councils, Innovate UK and Research England, came together to form UK Research and Innovation. Now, I believe some of you may have even visited the UK in 2018, not long after we were formed. But I think things have moved on significantly, even in the last couple of years, and our mission and funding have evolved rapidly as we've learned to work together as a single organisation. And I hope that will become very clear over the course of this event from the other speakers. So this is UKRI's mission statement. And I must say it's a pretty standard statement for the most part. Many organisations around the world have something similar, I'm sure. But I would note the emphasis on 2 things in this statement. Firstly, how we work with others to deliver our aims, and I'll say more about that later. And secondly, how research and innovation are not separate. They're 2 sides of the same coin, and we place a lot of emphasis on ensuring that they are joined together effectively. And so it's not just about the money, which last year we distributed over £7 billion, but very much about how we do it and how we do it in partnership with others. So today I've been asked to reflect on the topic of knowledge economies, and I'd particularly like to make some comments on how the UK translates knowledge created by its research base into economic and societal benefit. So in terms of the UK's research base, there are many ways of measuring its strength. So for example, we can look at the proportion of highly cited journal articles, and here the UK does well, with over 14% global share of the most highly cited articles. But this graph here on the screen shows an alternative measure. So this is the proportion of our academic outputs that are co-authored with international partners. And I firmly believe that such global partnerships are not only good for research, but good for ensuring that we maximize the economic and societal benefit that may arise from it. And one measure of how successful we are in the UK at translating this world-class research into economic and societal benefits can be found in how much investment spin-out companies from our universities can attract. So venture capital investment is often quite a good proxy for the value of impact. Venture capitalists tend to be quite smart people. They can spot the potential of ideas and they are hard to fool. Secondly, spin-outs often stay local to their parent university, and therefore they're a very key way of building the ecosystem of high-tech, high-growth companies such as those found around Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. But this is an area where sometimes you'll hear it said that the UK is great at research, but not so great at commercialization, especially compared to the United States. But if one looks at the data, I think it's fair to say that this tired old idea is clearly wrong. And the UK has 5 of the global top 10 universities in terms of money raised for its spinouts, with Cambridge attracting more investment in its spinouts than Stanford, and Oxford attracting more than MIT over this period. And of course, it's not just about economic impacts. And I guess at the moment, there's nothing more powerful an example of partnership for societal benefit than the work between the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca developing a vaccine against COVID-19, which UKRI were very proud to support, along with many other initiatives aimed at tackling the global pandemic. So some brief reflections from me on establishing knowledge economies. I will say that these are my own opinions, and I will also say that the examples I've chosen are only a couple of the many examples we could draw upon. However, I'm sure the speakers in the second part of this session will cover some of the excellent initiatives happening across UKRI and the wider sector, and in particular, the role of UKRI initiatives such as the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and the broader support that Innovate UK offers to businesses to support innovation. But here are my 5 ingredients, which I think taken together, I feel are setting the UK on a really good path and continuing to build on our strengths in this area. So first point, I think, is that these things do not happen overnight. And in fact, they often take quite sustained funding over a good period of time to yield results. So here, as an example, I would point to HIFE, the Higher Education Innovation Fund, which has been established in England for nearly 20 years and has provided much of the capacity and capability in English universities to undertake knowledge exchange of all sorts, from IP and commercialization all the way through to public engagement and engaging with their communities. And this reached £290 million in the current academic year, 2020-21, which is about 1.5 billion Riyal. And the way this funding is distributed via a formula means that universities have some stability and predictability in how much they will receive, which is really important to build capacity over the longer term. Secondly, we spend a lot of time in the UK thinking about how to incentivize the creation of impact and encourage a culture of continuous improvement. I guess most visible internationally is probably the UK's Research Excellence Framework, the REF, which you may have come across. And this drives around £1.6 billion of funding each year into UK universities. And it's really set the agenda when it comes to how UK universities think about the impact of their research. But more recently, we've also developed the Knowledge Exchange Framework, the KEF. And this is a metrics-driven assessment of a broad range of knowledge exchange activities, including the creation of IP and commercialization, but also how universities contribute to their local area, and also how they contribute to things like skills development and continuing professional development. And this is a screenshot here of how we will present this framework, with the first results due in a couple of weeks in March this year. I've led the development of this framework, and I'd be delighted to discuss this further with you. Third, and as really reflected in UKRI's mission statement, as I said before, UKRI can't really solve anything alone. And it's therefore been very important that UKRI understands and works with the whole university ecosystem, from universities, businesses, and other local actors such as local enterprise partnerships. And this is where organisations such as the UK's Knowledge Transfer Network, who you'll hear from later today, really come into their own. And a really good example of the importance of taking this systems perspective can be found in the UK, actually, where we have many excellent universities, but in some parts of the countries, perhaps they lack the access to finance, including venture capital, that those ideas and spin-out companies really require in order to maximise their benefits. And the other conclusion one must draw from looking at ecosystems elsewhere is that one size clearly does not fit all. So we in the UK can't pick up Silicon Valley and stick it in the north of England, nor can Saudi Arabia. So we all need a deep understanding of the system in which we operate, and we need to tailor our solutions accordingly. And this is very true of the UK, just as it is every other country. So that leads to my fourth point, that funding schemes or other interventions must be tailored to address the specific problems or market failures in the country or the area that they're operating in. And in England, the Connecting Capability Fund, the CCF, has seen consortia of universities come together and work together to solve ecosystem problems in their areas. So whether that's the Northern Accelerator, which is boosting access to finance in the north of England, or Aspect, this project is tackling problems in the commercialization of social science research. What this emphasizes is that we are working together with the sector, but also that the sector are stepping up and recognizing their role and their responsibilities and the need for the English universities to work with one another. So together we move forward in partnership and cooperation with our higher education sector. So my final point really, and this is that people and partnerships are key to all of this. So in talking about all of this, one might sometimes forget that knowledge exchange and all the schemes and the funding I've talked about, these rely on people to work. So we often describe knowledge exchange as a contact sport. People need to get together physically or virtually and talk to each other. So the importance of people and partnerships runs through all my other points really as well. People and the partnerships they create are very much the glue that holds these ecosystems together. And such partnerships can be found and supported on many levels. So for example, it could be between different parts of a funding agency, such as UK-KSA. We have over 7,000 staff, and sometimes actually we need to make an effort to join up and make sure we are working in a coordinated way to maximize the benefit of our funding. It could also be between the funding agencies and the higher education sector. And to be really effective, we can't just give away money, but we must work together with mutual respect and really recognizing each other's roles and responsibilities in this ecosystem. And of course, it could also be internationally in the spirit of cooperation. Again, that mutual respect and learning for each other are the real keys to those relationships, which with the best will in the world and the best funding in the world, if those relationships aren't there, we will not maximize the benefits. So I'll stop there, but if you'd like to discuss anything further, please feel free to get in touch. I hope that the KTM will be able to distribute the slide materials, which has links to further resources. So all it remains for me to say is thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamish. Thank you so much, Hamish, for drawing together such invaluable reflections, which perfectly set the scene for our shared ambition in building an innovative knowledge economy and how to achieve that through collaboration in our ecosystem. So thank you, Hamish. Perfect. Now, please let me cover a few housekeeping before we move on to our next speakers. As you noted, this session is being recorded, but it will only be used in consultation between our two governments. However, the UK presentations may be reused by the FCDO and the UK. In our following sessions, each of the speakers allocated 30 minutes for the presentation, and then that will be followed by approximately 10 minutes of Q&A. To ask the speakers any questions for the audience, please can I ask you to put your questions in the Q&A box and only use the chat box if you have any technical problem with this webinar. At the end of each presentation, I'll invite Dr. Hani Chowdhury from the Ministry of Education and my colleague, Dr. Stephen McComb, to help moderate the questions for us. So that's sort of few housekeeping out of the way. That's all clear. I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Paul Mason. Paul is the Director of Innovation Policy at Innovate UK, the UK's national innovation funding agency. Paul has the overarching responsibility for Innovate UK's corporate strategy and programs that supports its development and implementation. So Paul, the floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed. Could I check, can everybody see these slides?
Yes, we can.
And that's in presentation mode, yeah.
It's in presentation mode, not presenter view. Very good. That's super. Good afternoon, guests, distinguished visitors from Saudi Arabia. Good afternoon, English, or good morning, English colleagues. It's really nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation to Alicia and the team to present. As Niju said, I'm Paul Mason. I'm the Director of Innovation Policy at Innovate UK. It means I look after the principally the strategy for innovation for Innovate UK, which is the UK Innovation Agency. So just, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but just very briefly to introduce us. We're the UK's innovation agency and part of UKRI, as Hamish showed you previously. And we focus on companies. So we help companies to overcome the obstacles to innovation. We help companies of all sizes in all sectors to access the research, the partners, the investors, and the markets they need in order to innovate and grow. And we help companies with the investment they need to develop their ideas, to develop new products and services. And this supports growth of the economy overall. So that's who we are and what we do. What I propose to take you through is a little bit of definition of what we mean by the word innovation, particularly business innovation, to talk a bit about the importance of innovation, why it matters to us, and then what the obstacles are for innovating businesses. And Hamish made, I think, a very important point, which is you have to target your investment in areas where it's going to have the biggest impact. And he sort of specifically said you have to have tailored support for the barriers, and that informs our thinking too for companies. And I'll give you a bit of an insight into that, at least how we think about it. And then what are the levers? What are the tools that can help overcome the challenges? And then I'll point a little bit to the innovation ecosystem. So all of the first half of the talk is about context, and hopefully the ecosystem will rise to the challenge of that context. And I'll show a little bit about who does what. Not absolutely everything, because the ecosystem's quite big and quite complex, and I'm not sure I could get through it in the time allowed. And then I'll summarize and try and draw it together, hopefully in a way that is useful. So hopefully you'll derive some benefit from that, and obviously happy to take questions at the end. So cracking on then, business innovation, we define it as being the commercially successful application of ideas. So it really does have to be commercially successful in order for it to be innovative for us. So it very specifically is not invention, and it very specifically is not discovery. So you achieve commercial success by developing or improving new products, creating new processes, offering new services to the marketplace, or changing business models, the cornerstone of what your commercial offering is, based upon new ideas or new technology. So that's not everything that relates to innovation. There's lots of things that are innovative which do not form within that definition. But for us who focus on business innovation, those are the kind of cornerstones of the starting point for all our activity. And put very simply, if research is the process of turning money into knowledge, then business innovation is the process of turning knowledge back into money. So it's a very nice partnership with the kind of activity that the research councils and Research England do with us at the back end, connecting some of those outputs into companies. Why is it important? Well, innovation accounts for about 50% of labour productivity growth, and productivity growth is the cornerstone of an improved standard of living. Firms that persistently invest in R&D have higher growth, they have higher productivity, and they export more. So it's really important for the economies because of those wider points which contribute to a standard of living. And public sector spend on schools and hospitals come from taxes, and therefore we need companies to generate profit and pay their corporation tax, and employees in work to pay their income tax, and then we're able to spend that on things that do social good within the UK and more generally through our ODA activities. And it's a bit of a truism to say, but the things that we are trading today come as a result of yesterday's innovation activity. Yesterday, over, it could be decades, or maybe it's only a few weeks. It's very much variable. But it's true to say that if we want goods and services to trade tomorrow, we have to invest in their creation today. And we're very mindful that when the global economy picks up again post-COVID, We want it for UK businesses to have products and services that the rest of the world wants to buy. And that's why we're very focused on investing in innovation as much as we can today and to support companies in that endeavour. Now, we're not too bad at innovation in the UK. We rank 4th in the Global Innovation Index of last year. We're very good in some areas. There are a few areas within that compound index where we're not quite so strong, but overall we do pretty well. But we still feel that there's an awful lot to learn for us, really, and an awful lot of improvement to make. So we're by no means resting on our laurels, and we're very keen to learn what we can from all of our interactions around the world and domestically to improve our activity. So let's talk about what the challenges are for companies. I fear that much of what I'm saying here everybody knows already, but I'll say it anyway because it creates the context for some of my later remarks. So there's a list of, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 things that a company needs to get right in order to be commercially viable and in order to survive for the long term. So this is just an example of a few. So first of all, they need a good and commercially viable idea, and they need to protect the intellectual property. They need to know who their future customers might be, and they need to know what they'd be prepared to pay. And they need to understand the competition, who is offering what the relative pricing is, and what the unique selling point of your own idea is, why it's better than other things that are available. And then you have to work out the best business model, so exactly what it is that people will pay for, and establishing your route to market. So having them paid for you, how do you get it to them? And then you need to build the supply chain, both on the incoming side and on the outgoing side. And that probably would need to be globally. And you need to manage, if it's a physical product, you need to manage stock throughout that supply chain that you're building, and work out who owns what at different bits of the value chain. You need to understand and control your costs, which are costs to develop the new product as well as to make it and then sell it. So this again is specific to physical products, but a lot of commerce these days is not about physical products, it's digital services. And then you need to develop your sales pitch and win the orders. And if you don't have any orders, you don't have a business. So although that sounds rather unglamorous, it's absolutely the cornerstone of any effective business activity, and deserves real focus and real attention. And then you have to hire people, comply with all the relevant laws and all those kind of things. So there's lots and lots and lots to do, and it is inherently difficult. And when you're doing something innovative, i.e. it's not been done by you before probably, then the answers to those questions aren't always very clear at the beginning. So it can be very difficult. And that is sort of where we come in to help companies with those, overcome those obstacles. And it's what we try to do is to corral the ecosystem to be slick and available to companies to help them move forward in the light of all those barriers that they're wrestling with. So I'll talk a little bit now about the innovation ecosystem. And I'll start off with a couple of pictures of it, and then I'll show you a very simplified version of it. So not talking in any detail about absolutely everything. So this first one is from the Anne Dowling review, which some of you will be, I'm sure, very familiar with. It's available online. If you search Anne Dowling review, you'll be able to find out what her picture of UK innovation. This is from about 2015, something like that. And she created this diagram, which shows the innovation ecosystem, R&D ecosystem within the UK. And I only want to show it to you because it has so many blobs on it. It just points to just how complex the system is. It really is a system of systems, actually, with all those little subdots. Now, the landscape has changed then because that was created before UK Research and Innovation as an entity that Hamish introduced earlier existed. So I won't spend any more time dwelling on that because it's out of date, but the system is still kind of complicated, and that probably isn't a bad thing if you know how to navigate it. So here's another picture of the innovation ecosystem. This was created by some consultants who were trying to draw a visualization of Innovate UK, so my own organization, and where we sit in the landscape. And so you can see that there's a whole series of different types of bodies in that space. So there's a group of things which are connected to the research base. And then there's some activities which are about premises and facilities, and then some others around finance, and then others around international and growth and working with overseas bodies, and then different types of activities in the middle. So again, I won't go through that in enormous detail. There's lots and lots of sub-layers under any one of those bullets. But again, it's just to make the point that the system is inherently complex in much the same way that an ecosystem in nature is inherently complex, but that all the different parts working well together is important for the health of the overall system. So what I'm attempting to do now is to simplify that into 4 boxes, really. So as with all simplifications, it isn't strictly speaking true, but it's probably a helpful guide to thought. And we find it useful to guide our thinking about the kind of work that we do. So the 4 boxes are, there's a kind of companies box, there's a public sector box, so that's bodies like ours, there's an academia box, and then there's a third sector box. And in the first box, effectively there's companies who might do business to business or business to consumer. They might sit in sector verticals, or they could be technology vendors, or they could be providing a broader set of technology support like the Research and Technology Organization, the RTOs, of which Catapults, of course, are an example. Then there's the finance community, who could be doing loans, or they could be doing equity, and they could be friends, family, they could be angel investors, or corporate venturers, or venture capital, or all the way up to private equity if you're looking at very large sums of money. And then there are the representative bodies of industry, so the trade associations in something quite specific, for example, like the Chemical Industries Association, or the CIA, CIA Chemical Industries Association, or trade bodies like the CBI or the Institute of Directors, those bodies. And they're very important in our landscape, and we listen to them a lot within Innovate UK, because through them, they are our kind of barometer of how things are going and what the current issues are that companies are facing. Alongside that sits academia. So we have about 150 universities or higher education institutes within the UK, and they carry out teaching and they carry out research. And they also do quite a lot of business engagement. The kind of careful ref work that Hamish spoke to is all about that interaction between academia and companies, and they spin out some of their own companies, and Hamish shows some great data on the follow-on investment that some of those spin outs from some of our top universities have raised. And then there's a broader group of learned societies, the Royal Society of Chemistry, who are very smart people who think about systemic problems or systemic opportunities closely coupled into deep domain expertise. So that's really important, particularly as a source of new ideas and a source of new knowledge. Then there's the public sector. So at the high level, we have national government, by which we normally mean Westminster, but it also includes Scottish government or Welsh government or the Northern Ireland Assembly. So there's Westminster bodies, and then there are the bodies devolved within the different 4 nations of the UK. And then there's local government, so mayoral authorities, local councils, those kind of bodies. And they're all very important in the landscape. Then there are the funding bodies like ourselves, or I've put there the Scottish Funding Council. So some funding to universities is not done by Research England, but it's done by national bodies within Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, etc. And then there's a series of competent bodies who look after particular areas of the landscape. So, for example, BSI's, what used to be called British Standards Institute, they look after standards from anything, what grade of stainless steel should you have, to process standards like ISO 9000 or ISO 14000. And they are the UK's connection into the global ISO system. So they represent the UK in the ISO system, and they are incredibly important, particularly in the innovation space, as new ideas come forward and things have to work along the entirety of a supply chain for the supply chain to be efficient, and non-efficient supply chains tend to fail. And if everybody's doing something in a different way, then those industries really struggle to grow. And so connecting together into ISO is incredibly important, and BSI does that for us. And then similarly, on the intellectual property side, we have IPO, the Intellectual Property Office, and they look after patents, obviously, but also they look after other forms of intellectual property like trademarks or like design rights or like copyright. And those are all incredibly important things which you can protect. And I think it's kind of quite interesting that the huge dispute between Apple and Samsung on the iPad wasn't actually a patent dispute, it was actually a design rights dispute at the core of it. So, so I think it's often people underestimate the importance of design and registered designs and trademark and copyright because they're very focused on patents, and that's only part of the picture. Anyway, so they're part of the public sector landscape. And then we have the public sector research establishments. I'll say a little bit more about one or two of those later. But they are funded by the government, or they're partly owned by government, and they look after things like military defence, R&D, or agricultural R&D, a series of other bodies like that. And then there's the third sector, so the charities, organisations like Wellcome Trust or Cancer Research UK. Cancer Research UK puts something like £300 or £400 million a year into cancer research in the UK. So they're very significant bodies, and we within UKRI work very closely with the cancer charities or with the other charity bodies, Wellcome Trust and so on and so forth, to try and make sure that the system as a whole works effectively, i.e. we're not all funding in one place and none of us is funding in another. Series of not-for-profits and social enterprises, and they are very important because they also bring a perspective as to what society thinks is the right thing to do with new technologies, as well as their own activities in those spaces. So they're always worth listening to and engaging with. And then there are a series of think tanks. I don't know, the likes of NCUB or Resolution Foundation, those kind of bodies. So that's, I think, simplified the ecosystem. And our role as Innovate UK, we see, is to help companies benefit from the richness of that ecosystem rather than being confused by it. And this slide, I think I spoke to it a little bit, but for the slide deck, you can have it in writing. I'll draw out a couple of points here, which I didn't mention before. The National Measurement Institutes, so they do metrology, how much liquid is in a pint, how heavy is a kilogram, how fast is a second, that kind of stuff, principally through the National Physical Laboratory or the Laboratory of the Government Chemists, but there are a number of other bodies like weights and measures and so on and so forth. Government departments are very important. Each has a chief scientific advisor, and their job is to make sure that government policy or the policy of that department is informed by scientific evidence and not by ideology or opinion, if you like. So do we have policy that informs evidence, or do we have evidence that informs policy? And we always prefer it when the evidence informs the policy, not the other way around. And they're quite important. And in some departments, they own quite substantial research and innovation budgets. I talked about universities and RTOs. Particularly in the defence landscape, there's a whole series of bodies who are really important, and we've got a very good defence and security industry in the UK, and those bodies are a really important part of both procuring sovereign assets for the armed forces, the various commands, as well as connecting into the primes of the industries. I talked about those. One last, the research charities. One last thing is the British Business Bank, which helps inform the flow of capital into the system overall. Where private money might be slow to move, the British Business Bank can help to stimulate that. So that will give you a little bit of an idea as to the richness of the landscape and the important part that many of the different actors play. And as I say, if you want the system to go fast, then the components of the system have to work well together. Back to Innovate UK then, particularly, what do we do? Well, we help, broadly speaking, in two ways. So I'm now simplifying again because we ourselves are a quite complex organisation. And Mike Biddle, my colleague, will talk a little bit about the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund later, which is one of the kind of interventions that we lead on. It's sitting, particularly within the Fund and Connect space. So we broadly do two things. We give people money and we help them make connections. So when it comes to funding, we do grants or we do loans. Occasionally we do procurement, but not so often. That helps companies to look at new ideas, look at the potential of new ideas that they may not have any experience in, to develop new products, processes or services, so to do the physical, practical lab work that helps them work out how you might make a product from a particular bit of technology, like a new kind of composite, or anything like a new kind of interfacial agents, a new viscosity modifying agent, anything like that. To help evaluate new business models, do you make it yourself? Do you have a fabulous situation where someone else makes it and controls it? Very much the Apple model. And then to accelerate the process of going from the idea to commercial success. And we hold it to be true that the first organization to market picks up the biggest disproportionate share of the value. So being to market first is commercially a really good idea. I'm quite careful with my words. Being first to product isn't necessarily a good idea if that's a product for whom there are no customers. So you have to be first to market, not first to product. Yeah, that's the name. And on the connecting side, it's about linking people to collaborators. So somebody who may have fixed a problem already, to the relevant expertise, finding access to equipment and facilities, finding people overseas with whom to collaborate if you're thinking about a global supply chain, and to develop your own capability. So some of the common innovation problems then, how do I find someone who knows how to solve my problem or may have already solved it? So why reinvent the wheel if you can find someone who you can bring into your supply chain with a solution? How do I get the academic knowledge out of the university department embedded into my company? That's particularly important with early stage technologies. How do I get access to the equipment and domain expertise that I need? How do I get enough money to pay for the R&D I need to do? And how can I get investment for the wider business activities? So R&D money won't pay for a sales team, for example, and it won't buy capital equipment for manufacturing. So mapping those against that model of funder connect, I won't go through it line by line, but you can see that most of those things are either connect problems or fund problems, or they're combinations of connect and fund problems. So to show a little bit about the specific tools that we support to address that kind of problem. A connecting problem, well, we're hosted today by the Knowledge Transfer Network, who are doing connecting, from which we're all benefiting. So a shout out to them, and they do excellent work on behalf of their communities. And they've been, we've supported them since we started in 2007 in different kind of manifestations, and they continue to offer value. So they build communities in high potential areas. They call them innovation networks. And if you are interested in synthetic biology, or if you're interested in design, or you're interested in quantum technologies, then they will bring people with common interests together to talk about how you can make progress in those areas. And that's a very important form of soft support. And they also provide some topic expertise. So they're good interpersonal people, but they also have domain knowledge. And through that topic expertise, they help us run things like overseas missions or inward missions to help find partners, or to understand how a particular country works, or how a particular technology in a particular country works. Knowledge transfer partnerships are where you transfer somebody who's on the books of a university, so an employee of a university, into a company to help embed that knowledge. And they shuttle backwards and forwards between the university and the company. And they help the company to really consolidate that knowledge into their operation, so they can train staff, they can write procedures, and they can do all of that kind of stuff. And then they bring the problems of the companies back into the university group to inform the next level of research that the university group might want to do. And as we speak today, there are about 800 or so individuals seconded from universities into companies helping embed that knowledge. Something we call Innovate UK Edge, used to be called EEN. That provides bespoke business support services to management teams. So it goes alongside the grant funding, and it helps companies to work out what their commercialization plans will subsequently be, make sure the management team have the skills that they need, make sure they're connected to the right levels of external help. And catapults and IKCs are basically equipment and expertise. We say under one roof. It need not be physically under one roof, but the spirit of it is that you go through one door and they can help you. And the next chart shows a kind of picture of where in the UK the main catapult sites are. So we have them in a number of different areas. And they're normally in topic areas where, in order for the industry to grow, they need access to equipment or assets which they don't have and which they wouldn't be able to afford to buy. So we have them in things like satellite applications or compound semiconductors, digital, cell and gene therapies. You can see them on the map, and you can look at them in the slide deck later. Another kind of connecting access is to universities, and we've talked a lot about collaborations. So over the past 12 years or so, this is the number of grants that Innovate UK has given to universities to participate in collaborative projects with companies. And so you can see that some universities like Manchester or Sheffield, Imperial College London, Cambridge, have had 200 or 300 different grants. And I should make the point that in all of these cases, the company has bid to us for money. So all bids have to be led by a company, and then they've selected to work with the university because that is the most effective way for them to develop the products and services, is to bring the expertise in to work with them in collaboration. But the companies have to bid, the universities can't come to us on their own. But about 20% of our money goes to universities in those collaborative projects. On funding, there's either responsive mode or there's thematic funding. So thematic funding is where you pick a topic and you decide to invest in it, like artificial intelligence. And the biggest way where we do that is ISCF, the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. Mike Biddle will talk you through a little bit later this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. Responsive mode programs, that is where you will support the best ideas from any market or any technology. I won't say too much more about that. And then we run a whole series of programs for government in managed areas. We call them managed programs. So, for example, the Aerospace Technologies Institute or the Advanced Propulsion Centre are targeted at the aerospace and the automotive industry, and we run the innovation programs with government money. So it's not our money, but we run the programs. And then investor partnerships, which is that point about how do I get the wider capital in addition to the R&D money, and that is where we work to connect our grants to private money to make sure that the overall package for companies that want to grow is as effective as it can be. So a few basic hygiene points about grant funding processes. So first of all grant funding is won through a competitive process. So I can't decide that I like the look of a company and think, oh, they're really rather nice, let me give them £5,000 or something. You know, I don't have that authority. They have to bid, and it is run through competition. So we only support the best ideas brought forward by the best companies. And a company has to be the lead proposer. They can come in on their own, or they can come in a collaboration. And one of the really important things in a new area of innovation is how you find the right partner. And so the Knowledge Transfer Network helps enormously in that consortium building process. So finding people who've got common interest in, or people with problems who would connect them to other people with solutions. And then we have independent external assessors, 5 of them for each application. And they assess the projects and they make recommendations to us. So we withhold we're the ultimate responsible body. We decide what to fund, but we do it based upon the advice of external independent assessors. And in every single case, we provide feedback to, there are very few exceptions, but in virtually all cases, we provide feedback to applicants to help them improve their projects. And we see that as really important, because even if you don't win grant money, you do get feedback and it costs you nothing, and you might be able to hone your proposal, which somebody else might help you pay for. We have competition rules, so it's very clear what we will and won't pay for, and what is in scope and what is not in scope. And then we have to make sure we apply with, before we left the EU, state aid law, or now we have to be compliant with the agreements around supporting companies that sit within the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which effectively means don't distort the commercial marketplace as you support innovation earlier up the pipeline. So we'll make sure we're compliant with that. And then once projects are started, we check for fraud before we let them go. And this is quite important for collaborations. We will not fund any projects where the companies haven't got a collaboration agreement in place, i.e. they know what they're going to do with the outputs of the project before they start. When projects are in flight, we send a monitoring officer in roughly 4 times a year, and they check that everything is on track. And if things aren't on track, it'll flag red lights, and we'll start asking questions about whether we should allow the project to continue. Well, we can't stop them doing the work if they want to. It's a free country, but we can stop paying our bit, and that's the lever that we would have there. Of course, people could carry on doing what they like even without our support. And then we make sure that there's a final report which reports the plan for the next stage before we make the final payment. So we do try to make sure that companies are focused on the next stage of their growth journeys before we go forward. Government levers are incredibly important. And here are just some examples of the ways in which government influences innovation. That's quite important. So they can be a purchaser, for example, the drug spend from the NHS or the military who might buy ships. They can sell things like access to the spectrum for 4G. They regulate or they legislate, and that's incredibly important. For example, in mitochondrial disease and the Mitochondrial Replacement Therapy Act of 2015, which allowed that treatment to go ahead, whereas before it would have been unlawful. They can have fiscal measures. So, for example, in the UK at the moment, you pay more or less for your vehicle tax. So that's the tax you have to pay to allow your car on the road, depending upon the CO2 emissions per kilometre driven, per mile driven. So that changes the marketplace through that measures. And there are a number of other levers the government has. They can do subsidies, for example, prescription charges, if you get drugs on the National Health Service. And then the chief scientific officers, chief scientific advisors officers I mentioned before, have significant influence. For example, with proposing how codes might work and where R&D money goes. So the scale of our activity, as I speak to you today, well, this is probably a week or two out of date. We had something like nearly 6,000 live projects, so 5,700. Of them, 2,000 were collaborative. So you can see just how important it is for companies to go faster by finding the right partners and working together, which could be business to business or business to academia. And you can see, the results that Hamish showed of academic to academic collaboration, how effective that is too. And of those collaborations, nearly all of them had an SME, a small company in some areas. So since we've started, we've funded over 21,000 projects. So it's significant activity and lots of case studies of where that's done some good. And we know that these tools that we deploy work. So since we've been going, over 100,000 jobs have been created by the companies we've supported, and it's put something like 22 billion in gross value add to the UK economy. So just to try and finish on time, my last slide now. Business innovation is absolutely critical for UK prosperity, and that means the standard of living of citizens in this country. Commercialization is really, really hard. I spent 25 years in the chemical industry before I joined Innovate UK, trying to help companies make money out of technology. So I know how difficult it is. Not everything I did succeeded, some of it did. But global competition is fierce. There are some really excellent companies in the world, and they can be based in all countries around the world, and they are great, and they are smart people in them. And so we really do have to step up and be as good as we possibly can be. And because of all the obstacles, companies need help if they're going to succeed. And we provide that as Innovate UK. I guess this is the advert. So one of that kind of help is about how you can navigate the landscape. So as I showed you beforehand, if you're a small company, you've just started and you've got 2 employees or 10 employees, getting your head around that can be very difficult. And we or our family help companies to do that. That can be through the KTN, or it can be through Catapults, or it can be through our own staff. The obstacles are not all the same, so we deploy a variety of tools. I described some of them, but that's the same point that Hamish made in his top 5 tips. Government plays a crucial role. I showed you some of the ways in which that matters, but we know the tools work. They do, we're working on new tools. We're working to be better at deploying them, but the basic core principles that we have been using, we think are right, and the independent economic assessments show that. And we have a new innovation strategy in development at the moment. I won't speak too much to that at this point, but just to say that global is a key theme. We do see that trade is a global endeavor between partners in many different countries and in different parts of the supply chain. And if we're not talking together and collaborating together, then all of us miss a trick. So development and development and growth is not a net zero game. We can all win when we work together. So I think I'll stop speaking at that point. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that's been useful, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'll stop sharing so I can see people.
Paul, thank you so much, Paul. That was really useful and really good that we could hear all the intricate interplay between all the key stakeholders in the UK's innovation ecosystem. and also how Innovate UK plays such a crucial role in funding and connecting the business innovation. I think as Saudi Arabia refocusing on SMEs, by by increasing funding to SMEs and also increasing the contribution of GDPs from SMEs, I think your message will time really well with the development over there. I'm also very encouraged by the activities on our Q&A board. So quite a few questions have come in. I'll just want, at this point, I'd like to invite Dr. Hani and Stephen to come in and say, and maybe curate the conversation a little bit. Hani,
yes.
Any questions that to take to Paul at this point?
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, Paul. It's very interesting to see the complexity of the innovation ecosystem in UK. I mean, it's amazing how it's all connected together and how each of those contributing somehow to kind of success the innovation for university. And I mean, there's a lot of interesting questions. I'll try to pick, those that are relevant to everybody. So who oversees the UK anyway? I mean, is it the government? Is it the policymaker? Who oversees that? I mean, and who puts the kind of KPIs and agenda for it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think the bottom line is that probably no one really. So within institutions, people have accountability. So within UKRI, we are accountable to Parliament and to our sponsoring body, which is BEI, so the business department. And we have to explain to them what we do with the money, and they set some rules. But the National Physical Laboratory has a separate set of accountabilities about metrology. And then the universities are charitable, have legal charitable status, and they do, in accordance with their establishing constitutions, they work to those constitutions. And of course, companies can do what they like so long as they comply with the law and with their articles of association. And the directors are responsible for making sure that the companies comply with the law and in compliance with the purpose of the company. And so that what you have is a series of actors, all of whom have quite a degree of autonomy. And they can't do what they like because they have frameworks to guide their action. But there's no central point of control that says everything that can happen. And our philosophy as Innovate UK is not to tell companies what to do. We think that people who run companies know better than we do how to run those companies. But what we try to do is to say, well, if you can explain to us clearly what you want to do, we will help you go faster. So there's no overarching, there are coordination bodies and we're part of that. But we think the best system is when people have freedom to operate at the local level within a framework that is set nationally. So the law defines a principle framework. You can't kill people in the pursuit of your, making it. I worked in the chemical industry. We did try not to poison people, but but basically those are the things that constrained us. Plus our customers constrain us because they say this is what I would like and this is how much I'm prepared to pay. So that creates a constraint as well. But there's no kind of super brain or supercomputer that controls the whole system. It's a series of autonomous actors. And that is why in the UK culture is why a body like KTN is so important, because people are free to collaborate or not, depending on what they want to do. Then you can only invite people to participate. So you have to make the invitation, and you have to make it in such a way that people want to participate and that they want to work together. And our belief is that you get a really good result when you do things that way. At least it works in a UK context. But it might not work in Germany so I think this is the point about local flavors are different, Anyway, so I hope that slightly long answer, but hopefully it addresses the topic.
That's very interesting to know that. Okay, so now the other question is somebody asked about, as academia is always challenged towards thinking about commercialization. As a scientist, as a researcher, it's not always the case that you have to always come up with a product or commercialization. Yeah. What is the biggest barriers or challenges that you've been facing to kind of directing academia to commercialization?
What I think is that people have different skill sets, and so I ran a factory for a few years, and I was a sales guy for a few years, and I worked in R&D for a few years. And my experience is that guys who are really good in the lab and are really good at, they wouldn't necessarily be very good at running a manufacturing operation, because you have to do everything the same all the time, right? You work within your Six Sigma principles. Everything's run by statistical process control. You have shifts. Everybody has to agree to do the same thing. If you're an academia, you're trying to think up sparky new ideas, if you like. So what you don't want is weird and wacky, sparky ideas every 10 minutes in a manufacturing environment. And if you're a sales guy, you don't necessarily need to get bogged down in the minutiae of the science that underpins, how the iPad works, how many layers of cellulose triacetate there are in the liquid crystalline display. I mean, you don't need to know about stuff like that, right? You just need to be able to sell laptops. So I think basically you have different people and they have a different contribution to make. And the biggest obstacle is different actors understanding the skill sets of complementarities and being prepared to play their part. So not trying to do everything themselves, understanding how to work with people of different types. So scientists understanding how to communicate with people on the shop floor, for example, if they're doing a manufacturing trial, or how to talk to a sales guy to tell him what, or listen to a sales guy to know what the customers care about, or translate from the customer. I developed a new product for spectacle frames, actually. So the kind of things you might make these out of. And the customer was saying the material needed to be stronger. And when I went and looked at their factory, it didn't need to be stronger at all. It needed to mix better, right? Because the fracture points were due to bad mixing, not due to polymer strength. And so that ability to translate the description from the customer into the pure science that you can then work on in the manufacturing operation is absolutely key. So, I think those communication obstacles and those, it's the great joy if you can get it right, because you can make real progress. And I think the humility of all the different actors respecting the views of the others are very essential.
Okay, nice. So somebody also asked how, like international people can, or like, for example, people or scientists in Saudi Arabia can benefit from the UK innovate. Is it very, it's very limited to UK, or is it open to international scientists and CMEs to contribute into that?
Yeah, I think, we are, one of the great things I think about being a Brit is we're very absorptive. The history of Britain is of people coming and going and people moving around, and we're a real mix genetically, and we're a real mix socially and culturally, and that is part of the great richness of the UK. So we are open to collaborations globally, to playing our part in those partnerships, and to people coming and working in the UK. And for example, for scientists, we have talent visas to help scientists from overseas come and work in UK universities. And UKRI has a kind of attribution of visas that they can allocate. And then, of course, collaborations across boundaries, where companies will get together and want to collaborate, then we're all up for supporting that. And the Knowledge Transfer Network can help companies from overseas find companies. I speak as Innovate UK, so it's about companies, really. If there are companies in Saudi Arabia who would want to collaborate with UK companies for some type of topic, then I would put the question to the Knowledge Transfer Network that says, this company in Saudi Arabia is very interested in working with a UK company on the following types of areas. Do you have any suggestions, any people you can introduce us to? And that is the kind of thing that we try to make happen smoothly. We can't guarantee success because the UK side has to want to participate, and it goes in the same direction. The UK company might go, can you do anyone in Saudi Arabia who might do this? And in fact, nobody in Saudi Arabia might care about it. So it goes both ways.
Coming to, the programs and initiatives that the UK Innovate is running, how much the pandemic really affected the programs and the milestones that were planned for the last year? Did the scheme of funding or programs have changed, and like the whole, the policy, how much that was affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, quite a lot actually. Where people have had to go into the workplace physically to do the research, if those facilities have been closed, it's meant some of that research has been delayed. we have been quite flexible, because normally we have a contract, which means companies have to do certain work packages by certain times, and we've given people time extensions. I can't remember the exact number of companies we've given a time extension to, but it's probably, you know, many hundreds, somewhere between 500, 600, 700, I would think. And then, of course, we've run a lot of additional investment programs into companies to help them survive. If you look at what happened to UK R&D in 2008, following the great financial crisis of 2008, quite a few sectors cut back on their R&D. And but what the evidence shows is that if you didn't cut back on R&D, then in 2010, 2012, you were doing much stronger, because you were competing with guys who had cut back. So we've made a big effort in the last 12 months to try and keep the R&D infrastructure within companies vibrant and healthy and still going. And that's one of the reasons that the number of companies we're supporting it's 2 or 3 times more than it was 12 months ago, simply because we've been trying to invest so heavily in that R&D infrastructure to keep it going.
So I know that we're left with only 3 minutes. So what is the percentage of funded projects that really succeed? I mean, to kind of for commercialization. I mean, I've seen a large number of funding shown on a very nice graph. But what is the percentage of success rate here?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer, because there are so many different types of projects at different maturities. Yeah. So we know that if you look at GVA, it's about a 7-to-1 return on pounds, right? So that's where the figure of 22 billion comes from. But some projects will have succeeded, but they will have appeared in a different kind of product. So I mean, I think the nice example is the 3M. You know, we all have these post-it notes, you know, these sorts of things, right? You know, and that started out as an R&D project within 3M window film, to have window films and adhesive that you could put on glass and move the film around easier. So they were trying to make a low-tack adhesive. It ended up in an enormous product line for post-its, right? So if you funded the adhesive project, would you call that a failure because it's not on the windows, or would you call it a success because you've got a post-it industry? So there's quite a lot of projects that we fund that there isn't a one-to-one mapping between the project that you support and the eventual commercialization. And obviously, the closer back to the research base you go, the more convoluted is the pathway to research. So most projects, we don't close very many projects. So most projects execute themselves well. But to get a statistical number for the ones that eventually end up in the marketplace, I've never seen that we've been able to do it, actually. We have lots of individual examples, you know, hundreds of them. Yeah. But statistically, to do that mapping is, I think, very difficult.
And also to add as well, Hani, because of nature of innovation, sometimes the commercial impact of success per se happens 15 years later, and it's sometimes extremely difficult to track that you know, those success in innovation. I would add as well. Yeah, Hani, I'm just mindful about time. Paul, perhaps one last question, Paul. There's a question around: do you expect the culture of companies in Saudi that will allow experience of working with UK businesses? If not, how do you think we can start creating the interaction?
Do you know what? I know so little about Saudi Arabia, to my shame. I'm really sorry. I really don't know how that would work. But what I do think is true is that business culture is pretty universal. So I worked in America for a few years. I looked after our operation in Japan, technology operation we had in Japan for a few years. And I think the language of business is pretty universal. Most people who have P&Ls, they understand what return on capital employed means. And so there are cultural differences which we can celebrate. And I can't see any reason why Saudi Arabian businesses and UK businesses couldn't collaborate very well. My instinct is I imagine they probably already are. Yeah. In different areas, you know, in defense, in oil, petrochemicals, in tourism, those sorts of things. There are probably other areas I'm not aware of. So I would say let's try and do it and see how we get on.
Yeah, Paul, absolutely. I think today is the first step, isn't it, towards building a relationship, and also coming back, Hani, to your earlier questions about how you know, Saudi businesses or universities could benefit from collaboration with the UK. I think ultimately, if we would be able to get to a point where we could establish some kind of bilateral cooperation programs between the UK and Saudi, and I think that would be a really strong mechanism to bring them together.
And I think the UK side would benefit too. It definitely wouldn't be one-way traffic. And my experience of, I mean, this is perhaps a salesman's experience, but every time I sold a product, I knew that the people buying it were buying it because they wanted to buy it, right? So every time you're in a collaboration, both parties have to have something from it. Otherwise, the collaboration isn't strong. So I definitely wouldn't say, if we were able to do collaborations between our two countries, I wouldn't see that as being one-way traffic in any way. I would expect both sides to benefit.
Brilliant, Paul. Thank you. Henny, thank you so much. Paul, thank you so much for making time today, Paul. We'll move on to our next speaker then. So
thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. We'll see you later, Paul.
See you later. I'm sorry I have to leave because we've got a board meeting that I have to go to now, but I hope to have a wonderful day. I hope it's really successful, and follow up with any particular points you want to through our KTN colleagues.
Thank
you so much, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next, can I introduce my CEO, Dr. Alicia Crichton? So as a CEO of KTN, Alicia is best placed to share with us her understanding of the UK's innovation delivery framework and the role of strategic partners in shaping international collaboration as well. Alicia, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Niju, for that introduction. And it's a really great pleasure to join you today, and a really great honour to meet so many senior research colleagues from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I'd like to say a big thank you to all you Saudi Arabian research and education experts, but in particular, Dr. Al Sudri, the Vice Minister for University Research and Innovation. I'm really honoured to join you today. And I hope one day as well we can meet face to face in the future, because obviously doing this online, it would be lovely to come to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or to see you in the UK. So my name's Alicia Crichton, and I'm the Chief Executive of Ktn. I have been in this role for 18 months now, but before Ktn, I was actually working in innovation and funding policy for UKRI, the organisation we've been hearing about this morning. And I spent 7 years of that time working overseas, 4 years in China, well, 4 years in India and 3 years in China. So international relationships is something that lies very close to my heart, and I'm really, really pleased and impressed that you reached out to us to jointly run this event. There's so much mutual interest to discuss today, and I very much hope we'll be working together in the future. So Paul's just given you a really excellent overview of how the UK innovation system works. In fact, I learned some bits just listening to his presentation. But one thing that came out both in Paul's presentation and the first presentation from Hamish is the role of connecting. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is the role of stakeholders in a knowledge economy system and the importance of connecting those stakeholders to create a knowledge economy. And I'm going to give the example of KTN. So this is the diagram you saw before that Paul showed you. This is a diagram, as he said, showing all the different partners and stakeholders involved in UK research and innovation. People know this diagram very well. If you ask almost anyone in R&D in the UK, they know about this, even though it was published a few years ago. And one of the reasons why we all know about it is because it's so diverse and it's so complex. You can see here that the big green circle is UK universities, and the yellow circle is UK businesses. But as Paul said, there are so many different elements to the system. And this diversity is really, really important, as we need to be supporting different aspects of research and innovation. But the downside, as you can see, is it can become extremely complicated. And I think from speaking to the colleagues from Saudi Arabia, I think we all agree that innovation ideas and opportunities can often sit in silos. They can often sit in different sectors or deep within companies and universities. And this means that in every country, in the UK and every country, that we have the potential to have barriers for the wider adoption for innovation. And the key to success is finding ways to connect the different parts of the system and making collaboration easy and impactful. So our role at KTN is to connect. We connect businesses to other partners. They could be businesses, they could be universities, they could be any parts of the system. We connect them to new opportunities, new partners, with the aim of driving innovation and accelerating innovation so that we solve real world problems. And the next speaker after me is going to talk to you about the UK's industrial strategy. And the government realised, and we all knew, that when we work together, we can make a really powerful difference. So 5 years ago, the UK government launched the UK's industrial strategy. And that was all about us working together across that whole system on agreed goals. And you can see there are 4 key themes here that were critical to the UK, but they were also focusing on the wider global trends that will transform all our futures. And these themes, you can see them: clean growth, ageing society, future of mobility, and AI and data. These themes are important to most, or probably all, economies and societies in the world today. And I know with your vision for 2030 in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you also see these areas as relevant and important. So you'll hear more about how we tackled these in a moment. And what I'd like to share with you now is some examples of stakeholders coming together to address grand challenges like these, and looking at how we as KTN support and sustain this knowledge economy by connecting communities. So as I said, our role at KTN is to connect the right stakeholders at the right time to drive innovation. We partner with a whole range of stakeholders, including Innovate UK, who you've just heard from. But as a major stakeholder ourselves, we support initiatives along a whole wide range of themes, and we use different mechanisms to do this. And on this slide, I've tried to summarise the main ways we do this, and I'll look at each of these briefly now, but give you some specific examples in a moment. So first of all, we connect diverse communities. This is what Paul was talking about. I'd like you to really take note of the word diverse, because in the UK, it's been really important for us to connect business, academia, government, and also the third sector that Paul was talking about, like charities, and bringing them together, including actually with society, bringing all of those together. That's how we come up with new ideas. We have to challenge our thinking, make people think differently so that we can drive innovation. And that second circle there is about our geographical impact. So we do this in 2 ways. First of all, this is about us connecting at a local scale. So bringing together teams locally throughout the UK. And then the other really important geographical impact we have to have is internationally, and bringing innovators together across the globe. And today is a brilliant example of doing that. And then the third circle has been brought up a lot in the Q&A, is bringing research and business together. So a key aim for the UK, and I know for you as well, is that connection between universities and business. This is always a challenge, and you've just heard we've made great progress in the UK bringing universities and businesses together, but it's still a really big priority for us. And particularly one area we're focusing on is making or encouraging businesses to invest more in R&D and to change that culture in businesses, as Hamish was talking about. And then the third point is about our relationship with funders. So Hamish talked about UKRI and all the funding bodies, that's UK Research and Innovation. And we ensure by working together that we are involving businesses to help shape or inform both funding priorities, but also policies. And we also want to make sure that those ideas that I talked about at the beginning are being shared across the boundaries, across sectors, and between academia and industry. And then the final point is around insights. We want to use the knowledge we have from working with businesses to help inform future priorities, both for funders and to help inform policy making. So how do we actually do this? Now you can see here a map of the UK with some dots on it. So this shows the different staff and where they're based at KTN. So in order to be able to connect all of these stakeholders, particularly universities and businesses, we need people working across the whole country. So we have a team of 200 people, and some of them are on the call today. So we've got Niju, Stephen and John, and many members of our team. But we are all based right across the country. And many of the people we recruit have either run their own business or they've worked in innovation for many years. They really understand their sector. We've had staff with deep sector expertise covering all different sectors from creative industries, manufacturing, agri-tech, financial services. And 30 of these roles are specifically aligned to regions. They work in their local communities. So Paul was talking about the different governments that we have. We have the UK government. We also have devolved administrations in Scotland, and you can hear my accent, I'm from Scotland, and Wales and Northern Ireland. And it's really important we're engaging with those local communities and connecting with economic agencies or with the catapults or with the universities in their local regions. So really, really importantly, to be able to connect this innovation system and to be able to deliver innovation, we have to be able to bring all these different organizations together. And how do we do that? It's by having a really great network and knowing who all these people are. So this slide summarizes the network that we have. Well, it's a KTN network, but we're working right across that whole ecosystem, bringing different people and organizations in. So we work with, you can see there, about 46,000 organizations in our network, and we're continually expanding. These are mainly businesses, and the second circle shows the range of businesses we work with. So 72% of them are classed as small businesses. But we also connect into all the universities in the UK and many overseas through Niju's team, as well as government and third sector. And that means we're working with nearly 250,000 individual people. They're people actively involved in innovation. So let's think now, we've got all these people, both in the network and the KTN staff. How do we actually bring those people together and those agencies together to drive innovation? So we talked about building diverse communities. So I wanted to just give you an example of net zero, because I know it's important for you in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as it is globally. And the net zero agenda, as we all know, it cuts across all economic sectors, all societal challenges. And with this challenge in particular, we were thinking about how to accelerate net zero chemical manufacturing. And we wanted to answer the question, which feedstocks we will be using to produce chemicals? What will be happening in the future in this area? So what we did, we brought together funders, academics and businesses across a whole range of disciplines. That was people focusing on hydrogen, catalysis, chemical engineering, to explore feedstocks and to explore what will be used to produce chemicals of the future. And really, really importantly in this, we worked very closely with business and industry to define the challenges. So using the communication with business to shape what the challenges were and also identify solution providers. And on the basis of work like this, we then make recommendations to our partners in UKRI who are funding research and innovation. And another example, because this is really timely, we have a meeting next week of this one, I wanted to highlight this area around Jet Zero. So this also relates to clean growth and climate change, and this is around sustainable aviation. So the UK government, this is at government level, has set up a group called the Jet Zero Council. And the idea here is to bring together senior leaders in government, many senior leaders in industry, and also the research community. And we are working together to come up with solutions to develop zero emissions aircraft. And bringing together these different partners is so important to solve these big questions. I sit on the Jet Zero Council, and at KTN, we've been working with the UK government to help this work by bringing together partners outside of these big meetings to come up with really practical solutions to these big questions. And one example is sustainable aviation fuels. So a number of years ago, we set up an innovation network. Paul mentioned the innovation networks to bring together different stakeholders to work on both challenges and solutions around sustainable aviation fuels. And that's fed into this work that's happening now. And we have a number of different innovation networks that Paul mentioned, dealing with some of the UK's biggest innovation challenges. Well, it's not even just the UK, it's global innovation challenges. And they span many different themes from quantum, robotics, immersive tech. And we've got information on this on our website, so please do have a look when you have a moment. So the next area is around global alliances, and I'm here in the context of our Ktm Global Alliance. And I said earlier that working together globally, I mean, I know you know this, and I feel passionately about this, is really, really important. We all know that innovation is global. And by working together, like we're doing here, learning from each other is really critical in that journey. And in the UK, we have some brilliant examples of international research partnerships. And Hamish gave some lovely graphs about the impact of our brilliant research in the UK. We have very strong global relationships in research. But this doesn't always extend to innovation. And we have been working really hard at KTN and across the ecosystem to enhance our international innovation partnerships. And one example you can see on this slide is our recent work with Africa, and Niju's team is leading on this. We are working with different partners in the UK, including the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, part of UK government, to develop a 6-year global alliance with Africa. And this is part of the UK's wider ambition to create long-term partnerships beyond the UK. And the ultimate aim with this is to bring together investors, innovators, and governments with the aim to support job creation and economic growth in our partner countries in Africa. And we want to work together to build those innovation systems in Africa in collaboration with the UK. And we've continued this work even during the coronavirus pandemic, and we've been running all our events online. And in my view, it's been really successful. And a point I'd like to say, it would be interesting to hear your views on this, is although we all say face-to-face is much better in many cases, online has actually worked very well in many cases for us. So there's lots we can do working remotely together, even on international. So we talked about knowledge transfer partnerships, and I think there's going to be loads of interest in this. So as well as consortium building, as a strategic delivery partner, KTN, we work very actively with universities and business. And one of the key ways that we do this, and one of the ways we're very proud of, is through knowledge transfer partnerships. And this is a programme supported or sponsored by Innovate UK and a whole range of other funders. And the Knowledge Transfer Partnership Programme has coverage right across the UK. And the aim is to transfer knowledge from the university research space directly into business. And through that, we want to deliver prosperity and address societal challenges. And this programme is really successful. It's been running, developing and adapting for over 45 years. And when I've met in person the people involved in these programmes, they really are enthused. They develop so much by being involved in the KTPs. You're going to hear much more detail about this from our Innovate UK colleague Richard Lamb at the next one of these events in March. So please go and listen to that. But the example on this slide is a project bringing the University of Exeter, which is one of the UK universities, together with a manufacturing company. And the aim is to help manufacturing the COVID vaccine, which is obviously a massive priority for all of us, for the UK and the rest of the world. And we've got lots of other great examples of universities working with business like this. So please do attend that presentation in March. And I mentioned before the industrial strategy and how we want to connect business and connect partners with what's happening in funding. And as part of the industrial strategy, the UK has invested about £2.8 billion on these challenges through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And in a moment after this presentation, you'll hear from Mike Biddle, who will tell you all about this challenge fund. But our role at KTN, because you can have all the money, but how do you use the money well? So we were there to bring businesses and academia together and different partners to help shape these programs, to help identify the priority areas for the fund. And that was really important to decide where we should invest money, but also to bring communities together when we knew where we were going to invest so that they could collaborate, so that business and academia could work really effectively to come up with the solutions and the innovations. And so we could spend our money really effectively. And here's an example where we were a key collaborative partner, and this is driving the electric revolution. And I'm sure you all know in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that the electrification of the car industry is one of the most disruptive and fast-moving industrial challenges that the world has seen. And the change from diesel to petrol combustion engines has had or will have massive implications for the climate and society. So this all means that innovation has to go quickly. We have to really accelerate things. And to be able to do that, we must be connecting and enabling that cross-sector collaboration to happen really effectively. So we've just been talking about the industrial strategy and developing the right priorities for the industrial strategy. But to do that, we need to connect right across the innovation system. And really importantly, we need to ensure that business voice is helping guide those innovation priorities, whether it's government policy or whether it's funding for R&D. So we've been working really hard to gather all the knowledge that we have with our whole massive network and the connections with our business network, and use these insights to inform decision making. And the example you can see on this slide is where we worked with businesses in the services sector to find out their digital or AI needs and solutions. And the report you can see here is the AI for Services report that we published last year. And this is part of us right across the system, understanding national policy direction and the impact at local level. This work was carried out right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And through this work, we found out that all services firms throughout the COVID-19 crisis well, almost all of them, felt that the crisis presented an opportunity for digital transformation. They felt it had really accelerated culture change. And 89% of those services firms said that they expected new tech firms and AI providers to emerge as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And the outcomes of this report are being used again to inform policy and funding decisions. So who really cares? I mean, we talk about all this connecting, right? We need to bring everyone together. But what difference does it actually make? How can we see a difference? So these are some figures just from reports that have come from our work at KTN, but you could apply it to connecting work generally in collaborations. So when we connect two businesses, or an academic and a business, we connect it in an informed way. And about 2/3 of the connections that we make end up in a true collaboration. And by a collaboration, I mean 2 or more companies working together, or an academic and a company working together to produce a new product or a new service, or bidding together for money. And you can see on this slide that the companies that have worked with KTN, or the companies that get connected, and the academics, we reach their innovation outcomes faster. And what we are really interested as well is that businesses, around 60%, are spending more money on R&D. And we've put a pound sign here, which is 100 million per year. But in a way, the pound sign isn't the important bit. It's about the culture. It's about changing attitudes towards innovation and R&D. And this is the most important part. It's the changing cultures and the changing attitudes. So just to finish, I'd like to say a really massive thank you to all of you again. It's been a real privilege to meet you all. And just to say and reiterate that in a knowledge economy, it's so important that we connect both people and organisations. And connecting and bringing together new ideas is absolutely critical, both to driving prosperity, but also a better society. So thank you very much.
Alicia, thank you so much, Alicia. It's great to hear also translating from Paul's presentation into how KTN as a national agency are able to play such a role in connecting and making things happen both at national and international level. It makes us very proud to be all working at KTN. There are a few questions that come in. Honey and Stephen, do you want to pick up some of the questions for us, please? Honey, you're on mute, honey.
I'm going to wait for Harry. I'm going to talk. I'll just say to all my KTN colleagues, you can join in.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It's so interesting to see how you're connecting all the dots together, and as Niju said, translating Paul's presentation to reality. It's very interesting. So something you've always mentioned is connection, and partners. So how you find the right partner here? I mean, what is the ingredients to find a right partner or a right collaborator?
I think that's a great question, and there's probably lots of ways to answer that. But I think the really important part of this is creating the opportunity. So, and an informed opportunity. So there's 2 parts to this. Firstly, the staff that we recruit really understand their sector or their area. So we have people, if you take someone like Neve or someone like Stephen, they're out all the time meeting their networks all the time. And what we do this year, we normally run about 400 events. This year we ran about 800. And we're thinking about the outcomes. That's not just running an event for the sake of it. It's thinking, how can we make a difference? But physically, when I say physically, it can be like this, but bringing people together and giving that opportunity for people to meet each other, whether it's virtually or face-to-face, is really important, because you don't always know what's going to work. But what we are trying to do now is be much more proactive in reaching out to new parts of the network. So what we find, I'm sure it's the same in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? I find this personally, that when you go to committee meetings, or you're going to these big fancy things that are deciding priorities, it's the same people. It's the same people sitting around those tables. It's the same businesses. And what we want to do, if you want to get new ideas, we have to bring different people into the system. And we have to challenge, whether that's international, whether it's cross sectors, whether it's different types of businesses. We have to challenge our thinking. So I don't think there's a right part. I think it's about us finding different opportunities. And what we find as well is many of the people that approach us are coming for money. So they'll come to KTN saying, I need money for this thing, whatever it is. When we actually explore, very often it's not actually the money they need. It might be know-how, it might be, it's all different. It might be knowledge, know-how and knowledge or similar things, but there's all different useful connections that we can that aren't just about money. I don't know if anyone else from the team wants.
Yes, Alicia, I can come in a little bit, honey, in terms of international as well. For example, this year, as Alicia said, we've done a lot more since COVID, and including international. The problem for us has been where to stop and how to stop, because it's the demand for our role has really been accelerated by COVID, and internationally, even doing everything's virtual, we have also still managed to bring in impact. For example, we managed to help a Canadian government innovation agency to invest in UK businesses in the advanced therapies sector from our international work. Our work in Africa has been really really valued, because we're looking at rebuilding from COVID pandemic. So some activities that we are doing at international has been tremendous. So yeah, so for us, it's about very mindfully try to bring people, the unusual suspects to the table to create those opportunities and new opportunities, and not just connecting to the normal suspects. And Hamish would like to come in. Hamish?
Just to add to all the other reply from Alicia and yourself, which I completely agree with, I would also note probably a role for digital brokerage. So particularly internationally, and particularly at the moment where it's hard to meet in person, I do think there is a role for digital brokerage platforms that try and connect universities and businesses. Not least because it provides a kind of easily accessible platform for this very complex mix of funding, businesses and universities and other actors to get together. And one such platform we have in the UK is called Confer, Konfer, and that's been quite useful in just sort of providing a kind of a front door or a way in to start making these connections. Of course, there's no substitute for then doing the much more detailed work that people like the KTN do, but sometimes just having that digital shop front, if you like, is a very important and quite simple thing to do sometimes. And I've put a link to that brokerage platform in the UK in the chat.
Thank you, Hamish. Honey?
So, I mean, going into practicalities, and taking it very simply, as a scientist or as a leader, dean of research or innovation center, how you motivate the industry to really collaborate with you? I mean, this is a big challenge. I mean, the UK ecosystem is very much mature. Here, it's not as mature. I mean, attracting the industry is very difficult here. So what is kind of elements that you kind of motivate industry to kind of collaborate with you?
So that's a massive question that we could spend a long time on. And my background, I said I worked in funding of research, and I've also worked in a university, and I was director of research and enterprise unit in a university. So the question really, really resonates with me. It's not easy. there's all different levels to this. So I think, you know, if you're working in a university, part of this is about thinking about outcome as well. Like, what's the value of research? It's the whole culture that you have in your PhD students or your postdocs, or you as an academic or a leader. So, and part of that, as you know, I mean, it comes from exposure. So that relationship with business, or any outcome where you're showing that your research is really making a difference in the world, is really important. And again, that does come round to relationships. So if you have businesses coming into the university, or university people going out to business, and when you hear about the KTPs, that's what we do. So people like John and Stephen are out all the time, bringing together businesses and universities all the time. So I think it's a cultural shift. So Hamish mentioned the research excellence framework. I think the way that we measure the quality of our research, it's the same when people apply for grants, research grants. We have to talk about the impact and the difference it's going to make. So I think as leaders, and I don't know enough about your system in Saudi Arabia, but that whole mindset of thinking about what difference you can make with research and bringing in users, it's a very two-way process. It's about you going out and them coming in, but having that two-way dialogue changes cultural mindsets. But it has to really be, I mean, that whole picture of the ecosystem, we've had to think about that right the way through how universities work, how we measure the quality of research, how we work with business and make them think about innovation, how government decides and shapes its priorities. So it has to be throughout the whole system. It's a big question though. I think everyone will have views on this one.
Yeah, Hamish will probably be able to spend an hour talking about it.
I completely agree. It's an enormous question, and I think Alicia is right. It's about bringing all the different actors together at the right time. But I would say very practically, what first step can you do? And I think the very first step is often to try and start very small. So you don't have to go in with an enormous collaboration, which is trying to solve an extremely difficult question. And often small to medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, are a really good way in, where universities do not have to be world leading at a particular research area. They still have a lot to offer SMEs in terms of really practical help and support, maybe to help solve a manufacturing problem, or improve their processes, which can really create a step change in productivity and competitive advantage. And a very good example of that I saw recently, now this wasn't Saudi Arabia, it was a composites, a carbon fiber composites company in Dubai. The manufacturing techniques they were using for composite enclosures for fire extinguishers and products like this, there was a National Composite Centre, which is a Catapult network, high value manufacturing Catapult Centre in the UK, had a student who spent 2 or 3 weeks with this company, initiated through a personal connection. And in 2 or 3 weeks, just by looking at their process, he was able to really transform how they did that, hugely reduce defects and rework and scrap, and really make a massive difference to that small company. And that just took 2 or 3 weeks, nothing very sophisticated, but that's how you start building relationships. Start small and then think, prove the worth of the university to that business in an easy way and scale it up from there. Maybe that could lead to a KTP, maybe that could lead to a PhD program, maybe that could lead to a much wider joint program of research. But start small, prove the value of the research and the value of the university as a partner first. Thank you.
The other, just to add to that, so if you look at the different regions within the UK, many of them have slightly different approaches to those smaller pots of money. So you'll hear about the Knowledge Transfer Partnership, which is relatively small. It's all comparative, right? But there are really small pots of money, like what Hamish is describing, that have slightly different models around the region. So when you hear later from the university presentation, I think they'll talk a bit about that. So in Scotland, we, for example, have an organisation called Interface that gives very small grants for the type of thing that Hamish is describing. But that's exactly where, as KTN, we're trying to help, because people don't know how to get into the system. We have companies all the time, they don't know who to talk to or who to speak to, because it's so complex. So I think that's where we're working all together really does make a difference.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. There was a point about KTN's excellent activities and potentially a great thing to consider UK, Saudi Arabia, KTN to help make those connections in Saudi as well. It's essentially, technically, what we're doing in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, actually, is how we see ourselves in helping to build the capacity in the innovation ecosystem in the country. So it's a probably interesting conversation or an ambition to have for this forum. But I'd like to pick up the last questions. Perhaps Hamish or Alicia, feel free to come in. That it seems like what we focus on today is about innovation funding. There's questions around humanities and arts, where perhaps it might be slipping through the cracks, but actually it's not so in the UK. Hamish, Alicia, perhaps Alicia, do you want to talk about other research councils, perhaps, and how arts and sort of social sciences are being funded in the UK?
So I haven't seen the question as it written, but I used to work for the UK's Arts and Humanities Funding Organisation, which was really, really interesting because arts and humanities used to be quite an outlier in the UK. Even social sciences was quite an outlier. And over time, social sciences and the value of social sciences has been really seriously recognised, and Hamish will definitely want to add to this. But the same has happened to the arts and humanities. The arts and humanities research and innovation areas impact on our economy massively. Like culture is so important for the UK, and it's very often not considered in the central approach to either research or innovation. We've worked hard in the UK around the research aspects. I think on innovation, we still have some work to do, to be honest, if I'm going to be really frank, to bring the arts in more effectively. But when we do, it's really powerful. So we have, for example, an innovation network around immersive technology, and that's had massive impact on very small companies, and we're seeing really interesting outputs from that group, which cuts across a whole range of tech activities and also the arts. But Hamish, do you want to add to that from the Research England angle?
Sure, yeah. I think it is important to note that we do place a lot of importance on funding research, and there's two specific councils, the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Economic and Social Research Council. I would say, I think there are many good examples of the impact of arts, humanities and social sciences on the world. But I think sometimes when we think about how to collaborate with researchers in those disciplines, I think there can be a problem of the equity of the relationship. So, for example, in artificial intelligence research, you could think there's a potential ethics issue here. Let's get a social scientist involved. And quite often that's a bit of an afterthought, that social scientists are tacked on to a larger program addressing, innovation or societal challenges. And I think what we try and do really well and really, really hard in UK-KSA is to make sure that the relationship between the researchers is equitable to get the most benefit. I do think one problem is measurement. So I think the measures of success for much of this research are very different to the measures of success for scientific endeavors. So for example, when we're talking about commercialization and spin-out companies, what we're finding from the Aspect program, which I mentioned in my speech earlier, is that the measures of success for those spin-outs are not the same as the measures of success for a medical or life sciences spin-out. And we have to evolve how we measure success and how we think about what we value. I would say there is huge possibilities at the intersections between arts and other disciplines. And we see this, one particular example springs to mind is the intersection of the arts and cultural sector and health. And we've just funded a new national centre called the National Centre for Academic and Cultural Exchange. And what we're seeing there is huge evidence that the arts can have a really transformative effect on health. One particular project where an organisation at a university was using applied theatre techniques to help the outcomes for patients in hospital with dementia. And not only does this bring good, it improves the quality of life of those patients, but actually the outcomes are really measurable in terms of the money saved for the health service and better patient outcomes. So, sorry, that is quite a long answer, but I think in short, it's very important. The arts and social sciences are very important, but they must be equitable partners in innovation endeavours. And I think there's more to be done in terms of how we measure the success of those outcomes. Thank you.
I just want to add to that because I feel quite strongly about this. I think it's a great question, and you could ask this question in almost any forum in any country. So the other thing to add about measurement is it's the language we use, it's the inclusivity of the language. So for example, in the UK, we use technology readiness levels. We're always talking about technology in relation to innovation, and it means you're already excluding parts of the system. So there's lots of areas, including measurement, which is really critical, that we need to think about to not just make the arts and social sciences an add-on, but to make them core to the innovation agenda.
Excellent. Brilliant. Alicia, Hamish, thank you. And Honey, I hope we can wrap up this session. And next, we'll take a 10-minute comfort break. We'll come back here at 11:12 in the UK or 14:12 in Saudi Arabia. So please rejoin us in 10 minutes. Please stay in the room and just switch off your video and your audio, but we will also display a Mentimeter survey for you to participate during this break. So I'll see you all back in 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone.
was a physicist by training and an engineer by trade for 10 years in industry, in the photonics industry, actually. And for the past 4 years, I've been helping develop the Challenge Fund and put it in place across the UK. So that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. You've heard earlier about the industrial strategy, so I'll pick up on a little bit of that, but not repeat what's been said already. Then I'll talk about the Challenge Fund itself and some of the investments and how they fit with the grand challenges of the UK industrial strategy. Then I'll try and talk through some of the things that we've learned from the UK in terms of how we establish the challenges. So I won't necessarily talk through each of the challenges. I've got some information on those, but to sort of talk to you about how we approach that as a funding programme and what we were trying to achieve and how we deliver it. Then a little bit about the portfolio that we have from it, touching then on economic impact before a quick finish, and then we can have the Q&A. So in terms of an overview, UK expenditure on research and development has been stubbornly flat for decades. And the government has a target of 2.4% of gross domestic product by 2027, with a view to growing that to 3% of gross domestic product in the future. So there's a lot of work to do there. And part of that is that it's a very complicated landscape in the UK. If you look at most modern economies, then 2/3 of the spend in research and development tends to come from the private sector and about 1/3 from the public sector. So actually what we need to do is lift all of this across the board. And that is being done in the context of the industrial strategy. So we've talked about the 4 grand challenges earlier today in terms of artificial intelligence, data economy, future mobility, clean growth and ageing society. There were actually 5 foundations to the industrial strategy, which was launched in November of 2017, which was ideas, people, infrastructure, business environment and places. So ideas, where do the great ideas come from? And that's where the innovation activities fit. People, and there's been a lot of talk about knowledge transfer partnerships and the importance of connections between people. Recognise it's actually people that will make these things happen, not just institutions. Infrastructure in terms of things like rail networks or digital infrastructure, trying to have the UK as the best place to develop a business environment to promote research and development and technology and innovation, and also recognising that the whole of the UK needs to share in the proceeds of growth. So that was the context of the 5 foundations and the 4 grand challenges. The 4 grand challenges, you could in many different countries sort of look at them in slightly different ways, but they do fit with the big mega trends that all of us face globally. We are getting older as a society typically, although interestingly, obviously Saudi Arabia, a much larger, younger population, which is quite interesting, which is very different to the UK. We need to think about the way we move around. We need to think about how we can grow our economies and also make the planet better. And also just sort of think about how artificial intelligence and data is changing everything that we do. So the UK published, or in fact recommitted to the 2.4% gross domestic product target in July of last year. So trying to recognise that actually, we are a world leader, but we do need to think about how our economy works and how we invest in research and development. Also recognising that we've got quite a large service-based industry in the UK. So actually research and development and innovation in the service industry can mean quite different things. And sometimes I think that some of the work that goes on in those industries isn't classified as R&D, whereas in sort of more traditional, heavier economies, it can be. So that's something we need to think about as well. So in that context, the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund was born. So what we've been trying to do is it came together just as UK research and innovation was forming. It was actually launched the year before we started as a formal organisation. So we started in April of 2017. UK research and innovation has been around since April of 2018. And it was trying to establish a new approach to R&D funding in the UK, working across research and innovation. So working across the sort of traditional Research Council activity and also the Innovate UK activity that Paul Mason talked to us about earlier. So very much an industry-led programme, trying to think about the challenges that we face recognizing that it's about how these different disciplines work together. One of the reasons for the formation of UK Research and Innovation was the promotion of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. That was part of the NERSE review that led to the establishment of UK Research and Innovation, bringing everything together. So how do you have that thing which spans the economy, spans the disciplines? And some of the talk earlier about how do you bring in the economics and social sciences or the arts and humanities? Well, actually, what we've been trying to do with this program is exactly that. We've borrowed some of the techniques and approaches from the DARPA model in the United States. So what we have is a challenge director at the heart of everything that we do. And I'll talk a little bit about them in a moment. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do with this isn't just the things that are interesting because we think they're interesting. We're actually trying to do the research and innovation that business wants and needs. And the fundamental reason for that is that we need to transform existing industries and create entirely new ones. So in terms of the objectives, we had that we wanted to increase business investment in R&D and improve that capability and capacity, because if you're going to get to 2.4%, you need these things to work in partnership. We wanted to increase that multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research, getting the unusual suspects working together, also doing that across business and academia, and also different types of innovation. So try and build that ecosystem. Also try and get younger, smaller companies working with the larger, more established ones. So build those supply chains and those networks and think about where the value is and how everybody can come together. And some of the questions earlier was, how do you do some of that? And for me, I think the way to approach it is, for any of these problems, think about how is it I can help? Because if you think about how you can help, then you can add value to somebody else. And also to think about how we can increase overseas investment into the UK system. So if we can actually be at the forefront of some of these technologies, how do we then partner with people across the globe to deliver benefit for them, but also to help grow our economy at home? So in terms of, this is slightly small, I'm not going to go through all of this line by line, but all of the challenges that we have, and there are, depending on how you look at it, there's somewhere between 20 and 23 challenges. And they all fit pretty much with the 4 grand challenges in terms of aging society, mobility, artificial intelligence and data, and clean growth. There are a few which actually date back to the formation before the industrial strategy existed, which were sort of initial investments that don't quite fit, but actually do help grow the overall approach. And that the things like there in terms of some manufacturing projects we have and some satellite test facility activity that we've got going. But when you then look across that entire portfolio, this is what it looks like. So there's about 2.8 billion that will be invested, 1.7 billion, and this is all pounds, so 1.7 billion that's already been committed. We've spent about 1.1 billion so far. So these are long-term commitments, and you need to commit the money before you can spend the money, and then most importantly get the value from it. So that spend to date there showing up as 1 billion. In fact, I know the latest numbers from last week where we were up to 1.1 billion now. We've got these sort of 20 to 23 or arguably 24 challenges, depending on how you look at some of those from the start. And we've actually had over 1,000 or nearly 1,000 projects there that are underway. And in fact, we've got sort of 1,600 participants in that. So it's quite a broad activity, investing across the UK. And this is one of many dashboards that we've been developing to help show our political colleagues in Westminster and civil servants across Whitehall in terms of why we're actually getting value from the money. An example of one of those bits of values is actually one of our challenges from the second wave was the construction, the Transforming Construction Challenge. And what that was trying to do was look at how should the construction industry approach things for the future? How can it take a more engineering-based approach rather than a craft-based approach? And we were doing that from a technology and innovation perspective. But what we've also tried to do and have been doing is to connect that with where the future market side of that equation will come from. So not just develop the technology and the supply side of the research and innovation, but to actually think about the demand side of what will happen. So the big departments that actually procure buildings and construction across the public sector, education, health and social care, transport, defence and justice. And we've actually been working with them to help inform them for what's the sort of procurements that they should run in the future. So if they wanted to procure a net zero building, how would you go about doing that? Because that's not easy. It's not easy to build one, but it's also quite difficult to procure one in terms of saying exactly what it is you want. So what we've been trying to do is connect those two things together so that then when the public sector places those orders in the future, we've informed the customer so that they're buying the thing that they need, not just now, but also into the future, but also then started to build the supply chains in the UK that can help deliver that. And what we found from that when working across Whitehall and working across government is make sure we have those conversations early. That's maybe not a surprise. Try and get them to think big, both in terms of what are the big challenges, but also what are the things that we need to be adventurous about. And I think things like the commitments to net zero by 2050 are actually part of the things that people are recognizing they need to do things differently. So there's an example where the challenges help establish that supply side, but we're also trying to connect it to that future demand side. So in terms of how did we establish these challenges, we've learned many things along the way. So I probably know quite a bit about what to do and also know what not to do. We've tried several different experiments in terms of establishing these challenges. We perhaps not very uniquely called these different waves. So we actually had 3 waves of challenges. So the first in April of 17, the second in April of 19, and actually the third started in February. The second wave was April of 18, and the third wave was about February of 2019. And we called them waves because when you stack up the money that's going to be invested through them, they look like the waves coming into the shore. I would say that, so in the first wave, we established that from a basis of what are the things we already had, because we needed to be moving quickly. Our colleagues in the Finance Ministry, HM Treasury, were very keen to see some early results. So there were some things that we knew were very important. For example, we knew that with the move towards electrification of the vehicle fleet, that batteries were going to be important. So the Faraday battery challenge came from there. So there were some things that most people knew. It was also the Medicines Manufacturing Challenge, which actually established the Vaccines Manufacturing Innovation Centre. And at the time, we were sort of thinking ahead for what would you need if there was a pandemic. Before pandemic it was clearly a word in the scientific and innovation community, but not one that the everyday public worried about. And some of those investments have actually enabled the UK to respond, because through government investment, we've been able to scale some of the activity that we already had underway. So that was fortunate. Wave 2 was very much about working with colleagues in government and across the research councils, things that we knew would be interesting areas like construction, like the future of food production. And then for the third wave, we had a genuinely open approach of trying to get people across the UK to propose where they thought the various opportunities were. The one thing with that, it is very inclusive because everybody can actually put forward ideas, but also some people can't quite necessarily think about the scale of a national economy. They tend to think about a particular project. One of my favorites at the time was somebody who put forward rather than a big challenge which came. So for instance, future flight was one of the challenges that came from the third wave, or how we decarbonise our industrial clusters. Somebody put forward a £2.5 billion programme to develop a smart mattress, which was partly because they didn't have the sort of economy-wide ambition, but also they pressed too many zeros on the application form, which was part of the problem. So that was a learning there, that maybe you can trap some of these things early. So I think what we've done through there's a 2-step approach in terms of launching the challenges, and then there's a second step in terms of making the awards from that. And all of this builds into a sort of approach that we've then sort of applied across each of the challenges. So this isn't perfect, but it's typically how we've tended to do it. There's the challenge origination. So how do you make buildings better for the future and procure them better? There are the 3 waves that I've talked about. We have to take each of these through a business case process with government and with the Treasury to show that we will deliver value for money from it. We have a strong delivery plan, so it's not just an idea from the start, it's actually an idea and a plan. And we also know the types of benefits that we want to get from the very beginning. So it's a long journey. Research and development is not necessarily a quick thing. So actually, what are the steps along the way that you would expect to see? We also commission independent evaluation of each of those, so that it's not just us saying it's actually good. We actually have people external to us saying whether it's working or whether it isn't. And that's one of the ways that we've managed to build continuous improvement into the program. We then have a range of interventions and competitions. These are the investments we will be making, but trying to do it in the most open way possible for people to contribute the great ideas. And many challenges will have several of those over many years. We then assess those ideas, both through the team that we have, and I'll talk about the challenge directors in a moment, but also we have independent assessors that help us make those decisions about where the best awards will be. And we also then need to make that in a way that will be compliant with international law in terms of fairness, in terms of not market distorting in our economy. Each of those projects that runs, typically, many of them are sort of 2 to 3 years. Some are much shorter, maybe, as short as 3 months or possibly 6. And we actually sort of monitor them along the way. So are they actually achieving what they said they were going to do? And if it isn't, then we can stop or pause a project and work with them to try and understand it. Or maybe actually they want to actually stop it themselves because it's not delivering the value that they wanted. So we try and do that in a way that works for all partners. We then try and capture the benefits as we go along and make sure that informs how that works, and to feed that back into what's working well in those projects or what's working well in that portfolio. Ultimately, we then have the completion of the project and the evaluation, which we've commissioned early on in the challenge, then starts to look at the outputs of those projects. So we've got that independent economic view that we are actually delivering good value for the public sector investment. So all of that is also reviewed monthly and quarterly by a board that we have working across UK research and innovation, but also with our partners in the Department for Business and also our colleagues in Treasury as well. So I've mentioned challenge directors and their importance. So what we've tried to do here is borrow from the DARPA program manager model of have people that are leading in their industry to help make the choices and make sure that things are being delivered by the projects that we fund in a way that they will actually make benefit across the UK economy. So for the Faraday Battery Challenge, that's led by a gentleman called Tony Harper. He's from Jaguar Land Rover and had a background in R&D there. But it's not just about the vehicle fleet there, it's actually thinking about what do we need from batteries for the future. And obviously that's become of increasing importance across the world. Quantum technologies, Roger McKinley comes from a sort of background in defense, but also sort of photonics. And quantum is one of those areas where the UK has a strong scientific and discovery-led research base, and trying to think about how do you actually take some of that strong scientific and discovery research and bring that through into the innovation system to exploit it for economic value. And then we've also got Alison Cave as an example for accelerating detection of disease and early data to early diagnosis of precision medicine. And Alison used to be with the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, so she knows what it's like to be a regulator, and she also knows what it's like to actually work in these ways across funders as well from her time at Wellcome. So we've got people with expertise that can understand what people are trying to achieve and work with them to help make the necessary decisions, both in terms of funding, but also potentially in terms of stopping things if they're not working. So that's right at the heart of what we do. In terms of the portfolio of challenges, so I showed how they were fitting with the grand challenges. If you look at them slightly differently and looking at the sort of thrusts of where things are going across the UK at the moment, net zero plus, health, aging and well-being, and transformative technology, all of the challenges that we have map onto that space to a greater or lesser extent. And in fact, although some of these challenges were being established as the industrial strategy itself was being established, but also as some of the importance of net zero plus was becoming apparent, actually we were sort of ahead of the game, and that by looking at those longer term mega trends, it kind of put us in the right sort of area for having a good impact on the economy. We've also trying to think about how we connect across that funding space. So I mentioned about trying to bring together small and medium enterprises with large companies, promote business and academic collaboration. And this is where the funding's gone by wave. And you can see the purple is wave 1, light blue wave 2, and darker blue is wave 3. And then there has been some changes there, but you can see that we are actually getting a good spread of investment across the various players. So we are bringing that ecosystem together. The funding for medium companies is much lower. That's actually partly an artifact of the UK economy, in that we don't have as many medium-sized enterprises. So medium-sized enterprises would be up to about 250 employees. Larger companies are above 250. Small and micro there is people sort of below about 50 employees, etc. And obviously the academic players, and then other would cover things like the catapults or the National Physical Laboratory, some of those other research actors that Paul Mason talked about earlier. So with all of this, the most important thing then is to think about or to show that we're actually delivering value for money. So one of the things we tried to embed from the start and to show to the funders in Whitehall was that to say that we would have an approach from the very beginning that would assess impact and deliver value for money. So what we've actually done is we have this in place across all of the challenges, and we also have an evaluation underway across the whole program. So there's the individual projects that are funded, there's then the various challenges, things like the Faraday Battery Challenge, the Transforming Construction Challenge. Each of those have their independent plans, and then we have a plan at the very top which actually brings all of that together. So what we're trying to show there is that by, when you do invest well in partnership with the private sector, you can have good value. And in fact, of the funding we have already spent, so not the total awarded, but the programs that are towards their end of finishing, so roughly covering about 200 to 300 million of funding, we're seeing a 1.1 billion increase in additional net turnover for those companies. And hopefully that was a trend that will continue. We're also seeing that for people that we fund compared to those that we don't, that there's typically on average a growth of about 5 full-time employees. So over time, these effects will hopefully grow. So it's early stages. We have a framework in place that will gather this data. And what we also then get is occasionally those success stories along the way that make you think this really is working. So for example, Oxbotica, which was funded through the self-driving vehicles competition, they recently had a $47 million Series B raise. Then River Lane, which is a quantum company, had a recent $20 million Series A raise. So we also then have a company in the robotics space that's gone from 3 to 4 employees to 50 employees. That company's called Rovco, and they're sort of doing unmanned autonomous vehicles undersea. So all of these things are sort of early signs, but it's not just us saying it's good. We've actually got the independent evidence showing that we're gathering that. And as I said, it's actually a long game. So this is sort of showing how we've built this plan from the very beginning. So establishing those baselines so you can know what's going on in your economy from the beginning, and then build that out through to the end of the program. So I showed earlier the 3 waves of funding, which actually goes out to about fiscal year 24 and 25, but we've actually got evaluation in place out to 2027, because we recognize that those impacts of those later investments will take some time to be seen into the economy. So what we've been trying to do here is have an approach that would show that we would have value, and actually show that we were good custodians and of public money. And indeed, if we're not, that we make sure that we do learn from that. But at the moment, as I say, all the signs are very promising. There was also recently a National Audit Office Value for Money report, which just published at the beginning of this month. So they've been looking at what we've been doing since April of 2017. So if you're trying to think about what's been going on in the UK, particularly from an Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund perspective, this document and that hyperlink would well be worth looking at. So if you type in National Audit Office Value for Money Report Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, that would probably come up in your search engine. And it is worth a look because it does actually talk about the things we've done well. It talks about the fact that we've been a learning organisation and that things have improved along the way. It also holds up a mirror to us on areas where we need to continue to improve. So things like, how do we go faster? How do we make sure that we could, if we were doing the next set of investments, establish the challenges even quicker? How do we make sure that the awards that we're making get to the places of the economy where they can have the most value as soon as possible so that we don't miss out on any opportunities? So if you want to know more about the Challenge Fund, I'd be happy to take questions, but also this is a great document to look at. And again, it's independent, so it's not just me saying it. This is actually the National Audit Office saying what they thought. So to summarize, before we go to the questions, so we've established a program, and it's a program of challenges, and it's one where we want to encourage people to take risks. It's not about us de-risking what they're doing. It's about us trying to promote them to take more risk in a managed way. We think it's the first of its kind in terms of size and breadth, both sort of nationally and globally, because, you know, it's of the order of 2.8 billion of government investment, but that has actually got commitments from the private sector of an additional 3 million. So we're actually working hand in glove in full partnership between the public sector and the private sector. Typically, the funding's determined and awarded through competitions and calls. We do think about the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary opportunities, think about how we can have programs that will make that difference to make that happen. Hopefully I've got across that we put in this robust monitoring and evaluation from the start. And fundamentally, it does get to the fact that what we're doing here is delivering a program which develops the research and innovation that business needs to transform existing industries and create entirely new ones. So hopefully that's given you a flavour of the Challenge Fund, and if I stop sharing, then happy to take any questions.
Mike, thank you so much, Mike. I think the ISC or the Industrial Challenge Fund remains the UK's biggest investment in research and innovation so far. And I think it's really exciting to see how many of the programs are shaping up so well. There's plenty of questions, I think. Henny, do you want to kick us on the questions, Henny? Or maybe Stephen, if you want to continue as well, please.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting to see that. Some basic questions. I mean, you have 3 waves of funding, and where the areas were changed or where there's the same? I mean, I know there are 5 major areas, but they fall in the same areas, or whether it keeps changing every time in each wave?
They were the same areas, but we've seen different investments along the way. So for example, in the 3rd wave, we had a much larger proportion in the sort of what you would class the net zero plus area now. At the time before net zero was being used as a phrase, actually. So that sort of clean growth area has probably grown. About half of the investments are in that space now, probably about sort of 20% in the health space, roughly sort of then sort of 15% or so in the mobility space, about 10% in the transformative tech sort of AI data economy space, and then there's those few that were a bit other. So some of that has moved around. Probably the biggest growth area has been clean growth.
We have something very similar where we have looked the research priorities in Saudi Arabia, which is aligned to our national vision Kingdom of 2030. And then I mean, I just want to get your views, how you kind of directing universities to kind of go towards these areas. I mean, how much the policy, I mean, the funding program or the challenge really directing universities to go through these grand challenges, I mean.
So what we try and do is, with the challenges that we pick to fit with those grand challenges, so each of those grand challenges, if you like, can sort of set the mission, where are you trying to go, what you're trying to do. And some of them actually have some very specific missions underneath in terms of industrial decarbonisation of clusters, etc. And we try and actually get to the layer beneath that still in terms of what's the specific thing you want. So one of the phrases that we've been using or one of the words has been specificity, in terms of being really clear about the thing you actually want. And sometimes we've done it quite well, and others maybe not. And what we tend to find is, if you can be really clear about the thing you're trying to do, and that's not necessarily about just creating some magic new product. It could be about trying to build a capability, or it could be, let's say, something like develop a way for sort of quantum imaging in terms of sort of gravimetric imaging or something like that, something quite specific. By doing that, the universities and the companies can kind of get around it. They can sort of understand the type of thing it might look like. They can think about not just what it could be, but also what it specifically isn't. So we talked earlier about how creative industries are important, or the arts and culture section. One of our challenges is in audience of the future, and that's been trying to think about not just how do you take some of the great UK creative arts and think about what that will look like in an augmented reality and virtual reality setting. And there's actually something the Royal Shakespeare Company are about to be putting on in March, which is Midsummer Night's Dream, using some of the technology that's being developed through that challenge. And it's about how the creativity connects with the technology, so something quite specific. So that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying, the way we've encouraged the universities and the businesses to react and to interact is to have something very specific as a very clear target for them, and put the money behind it to then try and encourage them in that direction.
Somebody also asked the question, I mean, what is the expectations from this grand challenge from the scientist or researcher? Is it like a patent, or is it kind of more full-fledged solution, or I mean, what is usually the expected outcome of this kind of challenge?
So all of those things. So far of the things we've funded, there's already been 150 patents on the back of the funding that we've done, rather that hasn't. I think the fundamental bit is about trying to build the collaborations where everybody gets something. So everybody gives something and everybody gets something. So it's almost like trying to understand everybody's mutual self-interest. So what is it that everybody can give, and what is it that they will get? So we're putting the funding in to try and again, it comes to not de-risking the thing they were going to do anyway, but to encourage them to enter an area that they wouldn't maybe have been thinking of. So I think that's the main bit, I suppose, which is what everybody gets is the ability to explore something new in a new way, but with a bit of help along the way, both in terms of partners, but also the encouragement of the funding, so it's not all them taking their own risk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Nijo, should I continue asking, or do you
yeah,
have
maybe one more questions, perhaps. I'm mindful of time. Or Stephen, if you have any question as well, Stephen.
Yeah, Mike's very interesting. I mean, and there's a lot of questions around people asking, also around the interdisciplinary research. I mean, how much this grand challenge has really helped encouraging universities and scientists to do interdisciplinary research?
I think it's actually at the heart of it, because even in any given university, right, trying to get the different faculties to interact is tricky. I also used to work in a large corporate telecoms company, getting the different parts of that to interact. You know, I used to work in the photonics bit. We didn't talk to the people in wireless. Goodness me, no, don't talk to the other, you know, that's the other division. So, you know, that's just within one company. If you then think about that across the entire economy, it's really hard. So try and have the specific things and try and encourage the different disciplines, because you normally, you know, people can be banging their heads against a brick wall sometimes trying to develop something that somebody's already developed. They've just not applied it, or didn't think it could be applied in that sector. So that's what we're trying to do. It's not all easy stuff, but if it was easy, we wouldn't need to do it.
Yeah. And the themes, how, I mean, when is the next round of where you're going to change the themes of the Grand Challenge?
So that's, we're waiting for, there'll be another comprehensive spending review in the UK this year, which will actually set the budgets for the future. So we're trying to make the case at the moment to government that these are the sort of things you could build from. So hopefully we might know more towards maybe the autumn. And then if that's successful, maybe from the spring of next year, but to be determined at the moment.
But I mean, in terms of the areas of research, that do you think it will continue the same, or do you think the themes will change? I mean,
so I think there could be a different framing. So the UK government's sort of updating their innovation strategy at the moment. So there could be a different framing. But I think whether they call them the grand challenges or not, like I say, I think they actually capture the mega trends that we all face. So I think actually there could be a different positioning, but I think when you actually look underneath it, it will be it's the same important things in terms of how do we live better for longer? How do we do that in a way that doesn't affect the planet? And how do we get about better? You know, there's only so many things that you can actually get to.
Brilliant. Henny, thank you for that, Henny. Henny, I mean, actually, Mike, if you have time, Mike, if you don't mind, there are 4 or 5 questions open on in the Q&A panel. Would you mind responding to them, please, Mike, if that's okay?
Okay.
Yeah, and Henny, I mean, just a thought as well. There's a similarity in terms of the ISCF with your National Transformation Program, actually. So that might be something to consider in the future to have a conversation around. But Mike, thank you so much for your time, Mike. And if you don't mind to get on the question, that'd be great.
I'll try and do that, and then I need to head to that same board meeting as Paul Mason. So I'll. But thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
No, brilliant, Mike. Thank you so much. Right, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Our final speaker today to complete our lineup, I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Brian McCall. Brian is a Director of Innovation at Queen's University Belfast, QUB, and as well as the CEO of its commercialization arm, QBIS. So I can't think of anyone in a better position to share with us the research strategy of QUB that has taken it to the top of sort of UC ranking in terms of commercializing research and its entrepreneurial impact. So Brian, it's an honor to have you. So I'll hand over to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to join you. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to try and share my screen now.
Perfect.
So, okay. Thanks for that introduction. Yes, so perhaps a little bit about my background. I have, prior to coming, I've been at Queen's for about 7 years in that dual role as head of its commercialization arm and as director of innovation. So that role largely focuses on commercialization. So I'm going to touch mainly on commercialization as opposed to research strategy, but I'm part of the Research and Innovation Directorate at Queen's, and so quite a lot of my time is thinking about how do these two agendas reinforce each other. So I'll sort of speak about our reputation and the importance of our innovation and commercial activity, and then try and sort of reflect on how that links into our innovation activity. Just by way of quick background, as I say, about 7 years at Queen's, I head up about 5 of the industry-facing, business-facing teams, including QBIS at Queen's. Prior to that had my own business, software innovation business. Previous to that, another role at another Russell Group university, and prior to that, some involvement in aerospace business. So I sort of flipped and flopped in and out of the university sector, backwards and forwards into from my own startups and businesses. One of the title of the talk, which was given to me, sort of referenced the UK's top university for commercialization. So I thought I'd better deal with that. What does that mean? What doesn't it mean? And perhaps why did that matter? What I'll try and do is link that to why I think commercialization activity is important in the broader innovation space and the broader research space. So a couple of years back, we garnered quite a lot of attention for ranking as the most entrepreneurial university in the UK. This was a ranking that was generated by a venture capital outfit. So it was very much a focus on return on investment. I'll come back to that theme. And you can see they're picked up in the Sunday Times and Forbes, et cetera, et cetera. And I think part of the reason that this was regarded as newsworthy was it wasn't the usual suspects. It wasn't the Oxford and Cambridges and some of the larger US organizations, but certainly in this ranking focused on UK universities, a university based on the island of Ireland, Russell Group, research intensive university, but not one of the usual suspects. Wasn't really such a surprise to me, because obviously inside the organization, In fact, even before I joined Queen's, I was sort of tracking part of my previous startup, which was in the innovation space. I was tracking how various universities were performing. Here's a report that was conducted, I think it was 2018 by RSM Paycheck. This didn't gain any news, largely because this table was buried way in the back of an index about 50 pages in, but obviously it was of interest to me. In undertaking their report, they had clustered the universities in terms of those that they regarded as top tier, and Queen's was listed alongside Oxford, Cambridge, and the Institute of Cancer Research. Even before then, even well before then, this is a very old slide. You can see by the imagery of this slide how old it is. It runs out, I think, in 2012, 13. Queen's had been gradually climbing the ranks in terms of its status. Those numbers across that chart are fifth, second, fifth, second. This is before we floated KNOS and fusion antibodies and moved into that number one top spot. So it's not a flash in the pan. It's something that's been happening for a while. But the question is, what can we learn from that performance? What's generalizable? And what's specific? Actually, there's a sort of debate happening in the UK around levelling up and around the focus on some of the regions. As you'll see when I show a geographical map, for those that may not be familiar with geography of where Belfast is based, we're about as far away from London and in many ways the power and capital that resides there. So what can we learn from the performance of Queen's for other universities, and what's very specific? I must say that before I sort of major too much on Queen's reputation, there are various different ways of slicing and dicing the data in terms of how you perform. And I think Alistair will be sort of living and breathing this with KEF. There are various different metrics that you could use, that you could adopt to decide whether you're being successful or not. Perhaps one of the least, in some ways anyway, one of the least valuable metrics is how many companies do you create. Obviously, alongside that is the transfer of IP through licenses, etc. We do, part of our history of success has been that we have a very large blockbuster license deal dealing with a vaccine in the animal world, but nonetheless it's an indicator of activity and some progress. And I'll come back to why I think there's some merit to looking at the number of companies that are created. There's the fair value, or the overall value of the portfolio, largely an investor metric. The amount invested in the portfolio, which often is a headline in this area. It perturbs me a little bit, because if you like, that's an input metric rather than an output metric. All of that investment could be lost, particularly if you're dealing with public companies. They can be very volatile, but even early stage startups. Probably more meaningful for me is the turnover value of a portfolio, and so I'll say something about that in terms of our impact on our local economy. And jobs created, again, in certain parts of the world, particularly in Northern Ireland, high-tech, highly paid jobs are to be valued. And then at the end of the day, unless there's a return on investment, if people aren't in some way, those that are making private investments in this space, and obviously there's public investment as well, more complex in terms of the return there, but for private investors, if there's no return on investment, then really things are going to dry up. So I'll just reflect on each of those, and I'll mirror Queen's performance against each of these, and hint at why I think they're important, or the role of universities in economic development, in driving innovation and growth of productivity. So you'll see this is a very recent report. I think this was out a month or so from Bowhurst, just looking very much at the performance of universities in the spin-out space. And you'll see there, I think we're 9th or so, top 10 certainly, out of, which is not bad performance, out of 130 odd universities. but it's not, you know, the difference in terms of the numbers being created from larger institutions like Oxford and Cambridge is quite significant. But the reason I'd say that this is important, so this is for those who might not be aware of the geography. This is Belfast, Queen's. The arrow points to that little dot. You'll notice we're on a different island from the rest of the UK, and that sort of hints at what I would call sometimes in the innovation space, working the hard yards, that we're not in the Golden Triangle, we're not in and around London where most investment activity is happening, and in fact, where most entrepreneurial activity is happening. So there's lessons to be learned from our experience, I think, both in terms of the specificity, areas that are economically challenged. If you were to rank Northern Ireland and Belfast in terms of levels of productivity, VC activity, company startups, etc., it tends towards the bottom, and therefore, from a Queen's point of view, all the more important for us to play our part in taking innovation and taking IP from the university and turning it into value. Those little dots show the level of activity in terms of startups, and you can see it's not very strong in Northern Ireland, and therefore that sort of backs up my view that we have to do all we can to address that. If you look at actually the number of spin-outs, still a way to go, but Northern Ireland is fifth in the rank. So you can see the difference between the level of genuine startup activity and the dependence on the local university for creating these new high-tech businesses, disproportionately important for Northern Ireland. Cubis was one of the first organizations that had this agenda. Goes back, you can see this chart goes back to 1980, actually 1984. Happens to have been founded on my birthday, so there was obviously a destiny there for me to become a CEO some many years later. And you can see a sort of jigged pattern. The green line is the moving average of the number of companies that we have created over the years. Obviously, a blip in the dot-com years settled down, but a gradual increase and steady state in terms of the number of companies that we create per annum. So 4 companies rising up, I think we'll break that plateau and get to 6 or so. The important thing for me, though, is that these companies aren't just legal incorporations, that they aren't merely registrations on some sort of database. Certainly the companies that we've created over the last number of years, all of them have been invested in and have some indication of product market fit. I'm going to come on a bit later to the programs that we use, which we think are absolutely essential to determine whether these companies have some potential value in them. Focus on product market fit and customer discovery. We're likely to incorporate our 100th company in the next few months, and that'll be a big milestone for us. So that's companies created. In terms of the value of those companies, this is taken from the Octopus Ventures report, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. It was the first ranking. It's from the first ranking where they ranked all the universities in the UK in terms of their spin-out activity. You'll see that there's some fairly large figures attached to this. So you'll see Arm Holdings, Robin Saxby, if you talk to him directly, will often cite Liverpool as having an influence in that as well. But nominally, Cambridge, 24 billion. Clearly, as I understand it now, Cambridge don't have any holding in that, but you can see that some of these university-formed companies are very, very valuable, have quite a significant impact on the economy. I think most of those on the left-hand side have been exited. In terms of companies in which universities still have some interest or significant interest, the largest actually is Kainos, which is one of our companies, and you'll see there it has a current market cap of 1.6 billion. I think it might be slightly higher than that as of today. Talking about investment, I've sort of hinted at the fact that Queen's tends to work the hard yards. We have a better track record than most of our university peers. I think we raised about 7 million last year, but if you compare that to the sort of input values that are going into the likes of Cambridge, Oxford, and some of our American peers, we don't even really sort of register on the chart. And this is, again, a bit of a function of the concentration of capital in the UK. So you can see there in terms of investment activity, about 50% of investment activity happens in and around London. So we have to play our part, not just generating intellectual property, not just testing it and determining whether it's suitable for commercialization, but we also have to act, if you like, as venture capital, as a venture capital firm. And we actually do that. A very patient, a very high risk venture capital firm, which is part of our agenda, part of the Cubis agenda. And that's paid off for us so far handsomely. But if you look at seed activity in Northern Ireland, again, this is a feature because the VCs don't always come to us. We've had to play that VC role. So we're the third most active seed investor in Northern Ireland. This is deduced from the Bohurst rankings. And if you include seed and venture, we're still in the top 10, highly active. So as quite an extension in terms of our role in terms of making innovation happen is to put ourselves in the position of actually writing checks to make these things happen. In terms of our impact on the local economy, again, I think this is probably the most important aspect of what we do. And I noticed this report, the Industrial Strategy Council looked at the impact of various universities' portfolio of spin-offs on the local economy as measured by the turnover that they generate. And you'll notice here that we come second after Oxford on a much smaller research base, but not a bad standing in terms of generating value for our local economy. Probably would be larger actually if we included in there some other factors like the APT license that most people will have actually on their handsets, their phones, is a sort of very large economic impact that I think is probably not factored in there. But suffice to say, this is a way of really visualizing the various different metrics that are used to measure how universities perform in this space from the inputs. And often universities are measured as a proxy by inputs. How much income, research income do they generate? How much collaborative research income and how consultancy and so on and so forth. And often that is used as a proxy for their commercial impact. As you'll see, for reasons why, I'm very minded to sort of resist that, because Queen's, as you get through inputs to outputs, results and impacts, the value created, the turnover created, and the number of jobs created, etc., we climb up the ranks from a modest institution to a very impactful institution. And if you like, that comes down to a question of efficiency. This is one of my, when I generated this chart, I was actually quite startled from this. And this is why, one of the reasons why I think the mixing input factors and output factors can be quite misleading in public policy and deserve to be broken down. So if I don't know how well you can see that, but if I identify Queen's for you, and you'll see, I'm slightly colorblind, so I think it's blue is the research income stack, and perhaps a slightly darker blue is turnover. So if you like, what you can see is the difference in terms of the pattern between most institutions where research income, the inputs are significantly larger than the turnover created through the portfolio of companies. My takeaway from this is that it is possible for universities to be very powerful generators of economic impact just on this one metric alone. And they can do that in some of the regions of the UK, which one would think it would be harder to do that. I'll come back to that. So maximizing return on investment. I won't labor this point too much, but if you, my argument is if you put £1 into the Queen's research engine, you'll get more out by way of return on investment impact on the local economy and jobs. And that was the reason for this year that we were ranked as the most entrepreneurial university in the UK. largely a measure of the quality of the spin-outs that we create and returns that they get. It is normalized by the size of the research base, so it is factoring in those inputs versus outputs. And you can see there on the right-hand side some of the factors that they use. So it's not entirely just returns, it's the number of companies you create, disclosures. There are some input factors in there as well. You'll notice that we slipped slightly. Cambridge did catch us a little bit, still hasn't overtaken us. We'll see what happens next year. So you can see that I'm sort of very inclined to press the importance of university commercialization and the difference that it can make in terms of the local economy and the wider economy. I'll just put some sort of some reflections in terms of the UK, the specificities of the UK innovation system, if you like. And I think there are three things that are probably worth bearing in mind. I think, as most speakers have alluded to before me, the UK stacks up very well in terms of its science, good science historically and at the moment, in terms of the number of PhDs, just behind USA and Germany. Again, some of the speakers have alluded to, however, there are some wrinkles in that story that need to be addressed. We are below the OECD investment average in R&D, both in private and public sectors. And more relevantly, and I'm not sure whether this has been alluded to for this discussion, is the fact that in that public dimension, public R&D investment, it tends to be largely through the university sector. So the universities in the UK, for historical reasons, have been really quite important in terms of driving public sector R&D and obviously working with the private sector to try and stimulate private sector R&D. That's the UK there, and you can see the various proportions there and the relative importance of higher education in that stack. It's therefore no surprise that UK governments of both hues over time have been somewhat obsessed by the university impact on business and trying to stimulate more benefit for business from interaction with universities. Here's just I've drawn on a review of reviews that Professor Graham Reed produced some years back, and he listed all the various knowledge exchange reviews all the way through, I think, till 2014. There still have been a number since then that have been important, and perhaps again, I think this would have been mentioned by speakers before, one of the important documents that we're working through the implications of at the moment is the UK Research and Development Roadmap. But again, always a heavy incentive in terms of trying to get universities to work with business and increase that percentage of R&D devoted. This figure was, I won't labour this, because this figure was actually mentioned by a speaker before I heard, so this ambition to get to 2.4% of GDP by 27 and 22 billion. The question, which I'll keep coming back to though, is how do you make sure that that money is well spent? So it's spent in the right places, in the right means. What I would contend, and this is a bit of a busy slide, but that would contend there is data and there's information there at a meta level to suggest that focus on spin out and commercialization activity generally does help deliver that return on investment for increased R&D. So there's some figures there from the Spinning Out Success report, and there's some figures from Thomas Coates Ulrichsen there at the bottom also, who tends to be one of the gurus on return on investment for supporting innovation activity within universities. And you can see that starts to stack up to a tenfold return on investment across the patch for knowledge exchange or more generally commercialization activities. He's quite helpfully identified a 1.8 pound return on investment for £1 of which is one particular stream of funding in the UK when it comes to spin out activity alone. What I would contend actually, I think, is because you'll record that I'm slightly wary of the using input metrics as a as a measure for output metrics, and that's often what some of this methodology does. So I'm not entirely convinced that it picks up some of the impacts, the greater impact that some of the, I'd say, northern universities have on the economy through this spin-out activity. On the left-hand side of the screen here is a recent list, again from Beauhurst, of the 16 tech startups in Scotland. And having a look through that, 50% of those, around about 50% of those were from universities. If I do the same for Northern Ireland, this was a recent report of 50 of the Northern Ireland's most significant tech companies. It picked out 8 of those as originating from Queen's University, Belfast. But what I would point out to, the KNOS in the middle there is a 1.6 billion company. It's the largest current spin out with university equity holding in at the moment. Catapult is the fastest growing company in Northern Ireland. I think it was the 4th fastest growing company on the islands of Ireland, so on and so forth. So these, the ones that we have generated in that context, are actually quite significant and important impacts on the economy there. In the bottom right is Andrew picking up his Deloitte Fast 50 award. When we created, so it's been a long time in gestation, KNOS. When we floated, it was worth about 26 million, now 1.6 billion. It isn't the only publicly floated company in Northern Ireland. We've also created fusion antibodies alongside KNOS. And prior to that, we had floated Andor, which subsequently became private and was sold to Oxford Instruments. But the interesting data point here, and this is either a sort of a very poor reflection on the local economy, or conversely, a very good reflection on the impact of the universities in that economy, is that most of the floated companies, most of the PLCs in recent history in Northern Ireland have actually come out of QBIS and Queen's. So again, in certain parts of the UK, universities having a disproportionately significant impact on their local economies. We continue to exit companies. Most recently, significant sale, I think, is Titan IC to Mellanox, which itself has been acquired. And prior to that, we sold PathXL, digital pathology company, to Philips. Philips have actually exited this space recently, and curiously, one of our other portfolio companies, Cerdan, which has been invested in by QBIS and KNOS, has acquired PathXL. So an interesting role in terms of the spin-outs themselves, creating an investment ecosystem and sustaining quite a lot of economic activity that otherwise would have been lost to Northern Ireland. So this hints at this agenda around levelling up. A lot of the, you can see from the graph on the right, this is from the Missing 4 Billion report, Richard Jones and Tom Forth, which I think has had quite a bit of traction in UK policy circles. Not only do we need to increase R&D expenditure, but we need to ensure that it's adequately distributed across the ecosystem in the UK to shift funding from just being entirely focused in the south to, not entirely, but predominantly focused in the south to other regions of the UK. And my contention, as argued in the Times Eye the other week, is that actually some of the northern universities are very effective in doing that, and there's a lot to be learned from this. So I'll touch on the connection between commercialization and research in the last few minutes that I've got. And I'm not sure we've all fully cracked the sort of what I would like to suggest is a virtuous circle, or potential for a virtuous circle in terms of commercialization activity. Spin-outs themselves, often this is, we raised some cash for Ravana Therapeutics, an ocular drug delivery company, very successfully raised cash in the US last year. But has spent, I would say, about a third of its seed and Series A within the universities. It's still at the point with this nature of company, still very early on, it requires support, technical support. So our spin-outs in and of themselves become important funders of research. Our spin-outs also are quite important in terms of unlocking research. So we raised a more modest sum of money for genomics, omics, play, software company last year, Sunrise Analytics. But importantly, as a commercial partner, as an SME partner working with Roche, that allowed us to draw down for our Precision Medicine Centre a £7 million award from Innovate UK. So they fund research and they actually are quite important partners in terms of unlocking research collaborations. Many of the programs that we use to identify potential IP to be commercialized are also very, very effective. I'll come back to the whole concept of customer discovery. I think you've got Emma Burke talking about iCure later. This is a slide from the Innovate UK iCure program, which I have to say is a fabulous, fabulous program in the UK. But we have often used that as a way of informing future direction of research through undertaking activity, customer discovery activity with businesses. So this is the iCure program. It's the main, I think, program for Innovate UK in terms of helping universities commercialize early stage ventures. It's been very successful. Innovate are looking already to start to use some of the benefits of this methodology and this process to help existing companies. So there's various spin-offs from this. We're already delivering similar customer discovery programs in Europe, in AgTech, through Seedbed. And we're starting to, it was nice to follow on from Mike, we're starting to apply some of this methodology in the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund domain to see whether we can help accelerate some of the commercial outputs from that. We run this as a consortium with a number of other research-intensive universities in the north of England and our sister university in Northern Ireland, Ulster University. And this is starting to become a very effective and important methodology for us in terms of commercializing our research. So in the few minutes I've got, I'll just sort of allude to how this happens. So here are the 4 companies that we've created this year. We're hoping to get to 6 new formations. All of them have gone through the iCure process. Some of them have received some assistance from that. On the right-hand side is Bohurst tracking the utilization of UK spin-outs of Innovate UK grants. I would surmise that iCure is probably partly to at the root of driving some of that activity, entirely positive activity. And in essence, all it comes down to is that any of the early stage innovations that we have, we build a team around them and we insist that they engage in 100 conversations with potential customers. We use the business model canvas as an important way of identifying the value proposition segments, and then we teach the often early career researchers to go out and engage with 100 customers before we take it to the next level. We build a team around them. It's absolutely critical that we have a team to de-risk. Then we are very keen to use external sources of de-risking money, proof of concept money. So I'll probably pause and not say too much about that because I think you're probably going to have a session on iCure later, and finish with this last slide, which is I think we are moving towards understanding better that there's a virtuous cycle between commercialization and research. Research doesn't just drive commercialization, but it can benefit from it, and that commercialization can help us define the return on investment case for more spend in R&D. The success of northern institutions in the UK can help us understand how to distribute that more effectively, thereby creating a virtuous circle. And I will pause there.
Brian, thank you, Brian. It's wonderful to see how much work is going on at Queen's Belfast. What a wonderful sort of process and and success you're having there. Hani, would you like to pick, and Stephen, would you like to pick up the questions then for Brian, please?
Dr. Hani, you're still on mute.
Yeah. Hani, I think you're still on mute.
Brian, can I ask one question just to start off while we try to connect with Dr. Hani?
Yeah.
The area around trying to incentivize academics to be involved with innovation, have you any sort of comments on that sort of difference between somebody who's very focused on just publications, on general research that way, and actually sort of encouraging them to be more engaged in the commercial space?
Yeah, at that very early stage, that engagement is quite important. I mean, there are various different roles that academics will play, and our key process really is to identify usually somebody else who's not an academic to lead the business, to come in as a very early stage CEO, preferably somebody who has sufficient technical understanding to be able to have a meaningful conversation around the technology with the academic base and with the customer base. Whilst engaging in those that customer discovery journey, it is a very technical conversation. If the academic isn't on board, by and large, one will struggle. That said, academics have day jobs. We have to recognize that they have constraints. Some will prefer to go back to the bench, if you like, and not be involved in the business, and some will jump. We do have a number of very, very successful businesses where actually it's the academic that has jumped and played that entrepreneur role. It's the exception that proves the rule. But so there's various different ways you can configure these, but you need to find the right balance between the technical input from the team and external entrepreneurial input. In many ways, it's that latter part of the jigsaw puzzle which is hardest, to find somebody who has the right technical skill set and the right commercial skill set to come in and play the role of the CEO. So that team formation activity, we spend quite a lot of time trying to assemble. Sometimes they fall apart. One of the, I won't mention the company but one of the companies that I name checked in the slide deck, we went through 3 CEOs in its very early stage, and with each change of the CEO, we actually found a better candidate, and it went on to perform very well. But often there's organ rejection, forming those teams in a way that gel and works is quite difficult conundrum.
And there's a number of questions coming through around dilution and Series A's and Series B's, etc. Have you just general comment on how the university works without getting into all of the specifics, just working with sort of protecting the finances?
So around a seed, any external round, that's in many ways that's the easy answer, because that's just a function of price. So it's a market option, and clearly the university will be looking, and the founding team will be looking to maximize the value, but has to do that in a way that doesn't overvalue the company. If we overvalue the company, we'll never get another investment. So quite a lot of experience and discussion and, if you like, horse trading to try to establish the right price, and they will vary. But generally, that doesn't stop them. There's quite a bit of discussion in the UK, and it can be a contentious issue at stages before the external investment comes in, as to who gets what that external investment. So what does the university retain versus what does it give to its academics? What does the university and the academics give up to onboard an external entrepreneur? What do the option pools look like, and so on and so forth? So we spend quite a lot of time thinking through which are the fairest metrics in order to configure this to drive the right behavior. If you like, what will keep people focused on creating value in the business? So, we tend to, the more an academic is involved, the more we will tilt the deal in their favour. But we also want to make sure that other members of the team are also
recognised for that. Okay, very useful. Dr. Hanna, have you any questions?
No, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry for the technical issue. I mean, it's very interesting to see how Belfast has become one of the leading commercializing universities. And yet, as you mentioned also in your presentation, that it's away from London, it's away from all the big universities. Now, I know that, I mean, one of the reasons it's becoming top of the university is because the quality of a spin-off companies and the value that it's bringing into the economy. But now what made the Belfast actually, in terms of what is the ingredient was there in Belfast that really made it successful? I mean, was it kind of, there was so many startup companies around it? Was it the type of research they were focusing on it? Is it like there was a lot of funding available there? So what was it, as for any ex-university here that has no London next to it or no big funding or startup? So what is your recommendation and advice on that?
So, I mean, part of the challenge is being to the game early. So you see, we started in '84, and there was a lot of institutional support from the university. So the university, an old registrar, James O'Kane, actually about 10, 15 years ago, released about £2 million in investment to follow on. Now that's a tiny sum compared to what Oxford and Cambridge have now, but back at that point, it was unheard of. There were not many universities actually releasing capital to invest in it. So the institution was very supportive. That was one factor, not just with involvement from senior academics. Many of the vice chancellors were on the board of QBIS, but also putting cash in there. And at the same time, it married that with an external entrepreneurial board. So we had a board of business people. And many of the decisions that we've made around the investment in our portfolio, follow-on investments, have been made by external entrepreneurs. So it's getting the balance between institutional support and independent entrepreneurial input. And then we have been very keen always to see some market validation. So we've done that in various ways over the decades. The latest iteration of that is this model around customer discovery. So it's, the technology is not, is only half invented, to pinch a phrase, until you find the application for it. And so that process, whether it's iCure, whether it's Seedbed, whether it's our Lean Launch program, to encourage early stage academics. So we will buy out early stage academics for 3 months and say, for those 3 months, you will do nothing other than engage with potential customers, and then come back to us, talk to us at the end of that journey, and we'll decide whether there's anything to progress. So that's a really very important. There are pockets of proof of concept funding as well. So Invest Northern Ireland has periodically released proof of concept funding. So those sort of things have resulted in a very lean approach, which, if you like, because there's less VC, venture capital activity in Northern Ireland, we've just had to make sure that the proposition is so much more tight and compelling in order to gain investment.
Great, thank you. I mean, that's it from my side.
Okay, brilliant. Brian, thank you so much, Brian. And Brian, there are a few other questions open in the Q&A chat box. Would you mind just maybe dropping in some answers for us, please?
I'll do that, yeah, sure.
Brilliant. Brian, thank you so much again for joining us from Belfast. Everyone, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, that was our last speaker. So I'm glad, well, I'm sure that you learned so much about the UK's innovation ecosystem. We have a bit of time for a bit of reflection, really. So I'd like to invite Dr. Hani Chowdhury, Dr. Motaz Al-Solaim, and Dr. Iyad Al-Zahana, together with Stephen, to maybe join and look at some of the key messages that have come out from our speakers and how does that reflect in our conversation today. So can I invite all four of you to join us for that conversation then, please? So Hani, would you like to potentially start by providing a remark on your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very fantastic workshop, a lot of insight, a lot of things to learn. I mean, I made a list of kind of recommendations that I would definitely share it with Dr. Nasser, the Deputy Minister. And here I would actually like to invite Dr. Iyad, who is the General Director of Innovation Center at one of the leading universities. Dr. Iyad, if you want to share, and then I could follow up on those. Because he has some of the input and has played a very important role in developing the workshop also.
Brilliant. Dr. Iyad.
Thanks much, Dr. Hani. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Iyad Al-Zaharna, the Director General for Innovation and Technology Transfer and KFUM, and a part-time advisor to the Ministry of Education. It has been really both pleasing and inspiring for me to listen to the presentations of today's briefing. In fact, I have the three questions that I prepared for Mail Mason and Elisha and Mark Biddle, but it seems they have left the panel. I'm not sure if they are around. If anyone can step in from the UK side to answer them, so that we can maximize the benefits of this workshop for the Saudi side. Mm-hmm. My first question is, at a macro level, what are the best tools through which the national innovation policies could be employed for enhancing effectiveness of the national innovation ecosystem by delineating roles of the constituents and defining who does what? In fact, this is very important for us, especially that our ecosystem is at early stage of maturity. It is still much less sophisticated than the UK innovation ecosystem. And I believe there is much to learn from the UK experience in this regard. This includes first, enhancing the differentiation of universities' mission for research. Second, aligning the university's research with the national grant challenges, for example, as set out by the industrial strategy of the UK. Mm-hmm. And harnessing directionality of the university's research and making it more mission-driven towards economic and social needs of the country. Third, encouraging the interdisciplinary research to happen. I am just wondering if there are specific tools that were used in the UK side for addressing these issues. My second question was addressed to Elisha, but as I mentioned, anyone can step in and answer it. The UK model for knowledge transfer / partnership represents a strong paradigm shift from the typical narrow model of technology transfer / commercialization for the mainly the North American model. Yeah. It is largely a unique and much broader and highly non-traditional model. Is there a specific recipe behind the success in developing this model by the UK? And in your opinion, are there specific aspects that could be really transferred in a practical way to the Saudi side? My last question was addressed to Mark Biddle. As part of the industrial strategy and the UK R&D map, have you developed the specific tools for assessing first the contribution to the national economic growth and innovation performance of the country, and second, the well-being outcomes? Are there specific programs for capturing these impacts? And to what extent do you believe it is important to have a specific part of the national R&D strategy focused on the unicorns? Do you think this is important, and is it doable? These are my questions, and thank you.
Dr. Iyad, thank you so much. There's a long list of very thought-provoking questions, I must say. Hamish, I don't wonder whether you would like to maybe have a go at the first question, Hamish?
Sure. So I took away from the first question thinking about categorizing university, so what type of university and what mission they have, how to incentivize institutions to be more mission-driven and encourage interdisciplinarity. My overarching comment to that would be, I think it's particularly on mission-driven versus blue skies or fundamental research. There is definitely a balancing act to be had there. And I think one should be cautious about being too mission-driven. So history has shown us time and time again that some of actually the most impactful research has come about because there's been some very fundamental research, which at the time it was conducted has no particular application, but later down the line, maybe 10, 20, 50 years later, it will have a transformative effect. Quantum is one example of that. Advances in mathematics and quantum technology to allow unbreakable cryptography, for example. In the UK, I think we try and tension those two things with exercises like the REF. So the majority of the weighting for a university's research excellence framework's results is still about the outputs, the academic outputs. And indeed, most of the funding that UKRI directs through what we call responsive mode programs through the 7 research councils, the main criteria is research excellence, is the excellence of the research which takes precedent. Having said that, I think tools like frameworks like the REF and other modes of delivering things in cooperation have a role. And I think particularly when we look at the REF and the increasing weighting on impact, that has been the thing that's really driven this agenda more than anything else in UK universities, I would say. Yeah. The other thing I would say about different types of universities is, in some ways, I would not get too hung up on individual missions of universities, past just recognize that universities have different missions and strengths, and you should do then a range of things to support them. But I would completely agree that you can't make some universities do things they're not intended to do. In the knowledge exchange framework, which I showed earlier, part of that is actually we do not compare every English university to every other one. So we have very small specialist arts institutions like the Arts University Bournemouth. Then we have Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial College, and clearly it would not be sensible to compare the performance of those two types of institutions. So what we do in the KEF is we've undertaken a cluster analysis of English institutions, and we've clustered them into groups of peers of who we think have comparable characteristics, and then we only assess them against their peers. We do not try and pretend that a specialist arts institution will do the same type of knowledge exchange as a large research intensive institution such as Imperial or Oxford or Cambridge. And finally, on interdisciplinarity, I would say that the way things like ISCF structured and many other of these mission focused schemes, you cannot do a good job without the interdisciplinarity. So design the right schemes, address the right challenges, and to some extent that will follow naturally.
Hamish, thank you for that, Hamish. Dr. Iyad, as well, just picking up very quickly on your questions around the different roles of agents or agencies or actors in the UK innovation landscape. It has been, the UK system, it has been quite responsive to the needs and the needs and the drivers in our society and in the economy in the last few years. And you look at where UKRI is, it came out from a review that was commissioned by the UK government and led by Sir Paul Nurse, one of our high-profile scientists, in terms of how the UK's innovation landscape could be simplified. And out of that study was a recommendation of bringing 8 research councils together with Innovate UK under one single agency. On the other hand, we talked about very briefly about the various catapult centers. And again, that came out from a study led by one of our prominent investors, private investors, and very big supporter of academic commercialization, Sir Herman Hauser, back in, I can't remember exactly the year, and led to what was the investment into all these catapult centers in the UK. So the UK has been very responsive in terms of the needs and the drivers, and not just in the UK, but also globally as well. And it has been, we work with, I mean, my team, we work with about 25 countries around the world. And it is a model that even Canada and Israel are looking to in terms of learning where the UK is heading. And and again, I hope this conversation has been valuable in terms of sharing with you the case studies of how the UK system has evolved over the years. Picking up on your point about knowledge transfer and partnership, it is unique to a certain extent that KTN as an organization, is fairly unusual around the world. We have tried to benchmark ourselves against any similar organizations in the key economies, but we haven't seen any. So in my conversation with a lot of the partner countries, is very unique. And at one point, China was very keen about setting up a program. And it is on that basis that we currently have a program with Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, and looking at how KTN as a function could help to enhance innovation capacity for more self-sustaining and inclusive economic growth in the three countries. So it is quite unique. I mean, I have to say. So what we perform in the UK is quite unique. And I think Stephen would like to come in with some additional points. Stephen?
Yeah, just on that point about the uniqueness, if you look at a lot of the questions that have been raised today through the chat function and similar, it was around collaborations and finding the experts and trying to identify who has specific interests. So if you take sort of a lot of the conversation has been around what is the funding, what is the program that's been done. And I think where the KTP delivery role sort of fits within that is then trying to match up the right people to bring together communities to then sort of enable that. And that, as you say, it can be quite a unique function, but is specifically where there are gaps in all countries. So that is one part. Second piece is you asked about the tools and where the UK can use tools, etc. In our next of the series, we're looking at a number of the tools around the iCure program, the KTP program, the Future Leaders Fellowships, and the Catapults. So that should hopefully contribute a little bit more to actually detailing out specific tools which may be useful within the innovation culture.
Yeah, and I add to that as well, the fact that KTN is quite effective is because KTN is technically an independent business founded by the UK government, sitting at the interface between government and businesses. So it means it allows us to really operate quite impartially and independently to support our national objective of driving the economy through innovation, really. So it's as simple as that. But the fact is that we sit outside the government at that very, very unique position, allows us to make it work in the UK ecosystem. Hopefully, Dr. Ian, hopefully that addresses some of your questions as well. But please come back to us if there's anything that's unclear.
Thanks much. I'm satisfied with all the answers.
Thank you. Dr. Hani?
Yes, we have also Dr. Martez. He's a General Director for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Ministry of Education. Dr. Martez, if you want to shed anything or you want to discuss.
Sure, Dr. Hani. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mu'tazer Sulaim. I am, as what Dr. Hani has mentioned, the General Manager of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here in MOE, underneath the Deputy of Research and Innovation. Today, actually, I enjoyed this workshop and I have learned a lot. Thank you all for this wonderful session. I believe it was extremely helpful to have a good insight into the UK's framework and the ecosystem as well. I do have two questions, if you allow me. My first question goes to Mr. Paul Mason under his session, the UK Innovation Ecosystem. Mr. Paul, if he's with us, I'm not sure if he's with us.
No, I don't think they are. Unfortunately, all our speakers, apart from Hamish, are not with us. So but we can pick it out, or we can come back to you.
Sure. Yes. My first question was I want to if it's possible to elaborate more about the R&D framework, precisely when he mentioned the fund and the loans. My question is that does the UKRI invest in startups, or does our UKRI shapes the regulations and legislations to the universities? And precisely when I said universities, I mean innovation centers and entrepreneurship centers. Because if yes, I think it might have a conflict of interest.
Hamish, you're probably in a position to be quite, to take that, Hamish?
So in terms of investing in companies, so UKRI, quite a lot of our funding, particularly Research England funding, is given to universities in the form of block grant. So these are funds, flexible funds that universities can deploy how they wish. So whilst we don't invest in startups, university spin-outs directly in Research England, we do provide funding which may then form, for example, seed funding for those startups. Now, Innovate UK is obviously different. Innovate UK does directly fund businesses, and some of those businesses may well be startups or spin-outs from universities who then attract grant funding from the likes of Innovate UK. UKRI also invests in other mechanisms. So, for example, we've invested in UK I2S, which is a seed venture fund for fairly early stage seed funding, which UKRI is invested in. More generally, our approach to funding university spin-outs is not to take a very active role ourselves. So universities in the UK, their autonomy is protected by law, and they own the intellectual property that arises from the funded research. Now, this may seem odd in some cases for us to give the money and also all the rights to any resulting intellectual property, but the kind of parallel to this is Bayh-Dole Act in the US. So in 1980, the USA passed the Bayh-Dole Act, which did a similar thing. It devolved responsibility for the intellectual property to universities. And there's been quite good evidence to show that that had a really stimulating effect, and actually that the universities are the people best placed to take these things forward.
Yeah,
I hope that partially answers your question.
Yeah, Stephen, you want to come in?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. So if you look across the different types of funds, you'll see some of them are more suitable to startups and less suitable to startups. So one of the funds earlier on mentioned was about SBRI, Small Business Research Initiatives, and they tend to be very, very favorable for startups because they're close to 100% funded. Some of the other innovation challenges, again, will be not necessarily specific for a startup, but they're more suitable to a startup. Where if we move across to the likes of KTP funding, they tend to be more suited to a slightly more mature small company or medium or large. So it depends on the funding, it depends on how they're applying for it, and the competition basis will also reflect that.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well, Dr. Montes, because the Innovate UK's funding, it's grant funding. There's only been very, very few limited cases where Innovate UK actually co-invest, as in equity investment into startup companies. So majority of Innovate UK's funding are grants, right? So without taking equity in the companies, and the levels of grant funding in the companies are dependent to the size of the businesses, so the revenue of the businesses as well, and also maturity of the innovation that they're working on. So the closer the project, the project is to the market, the funding will drop. For big companies, Innovate UK can fund big companies like Rolls-Royce as well, but the funding level will drop significantly to like 20% of the cost of value of the project. For startup companies, it could be as high as 70, 80%. So there's it's quite a mixture of formula there, but majority of funding is grant funding.
Niju, do you want to pick up on Brian McCall? I notice he has his hand up with maybe a comment there.
Oh, Brian, yeah, sorry, I didn't see that, Brian.
Just wanted to comment on that grant funding and investment. I mean, it's interesting. I think Innovate has had a long history through various programs, iCure now, but the Launchpads previously, where its grant funding wasn't 100% for startups. It would be dependent on unlocking private match capital. And I actually think it's a very, very powerful model. I mean, if you think about it, these are propositions that are far too early for anybody seriously to write a check. We do have some very effective taxation incentives for people to invest in the UK, but the sort of ideas that are coming out of universities are so early that really there is just that natural value of depth. And in order to move things through that value of depth, these programs where there's a little bit of intervention, if you can get some match funding from a private investor, are very, very powerful and useful ways of doing it. You get a check, if you like, from a technical assessment from Innovate UK, and you get a check on the market from a private investor. If you've gone through the customer discovery process, that's also very useful. There is some experimentation with innovation loans from Innovate UK. A number of our companies have had that. I think that's probably, if they're going to move to getting some of their money back, I think it's probably a more easier model to manage than getting involved in what is already a very, very complex equity space at the beginning of the start of the venture.
Thank you, Brian. Dr. Mortas, did you want to follow? Do you have a follow-up question?
Actually, I enjoyed this session. I wish that we have more time to ask more questions. I would like to thank Dr. Hamish for answering my question, and thanks to you, me. Thanks to Stephen as well, and thank you, Brian. I think you all covered my question. Thank you.
Okay, that's great.
Mr. Hani?
Hani?
We can't hear you, Hani.
Yeah, I think you're on mute still.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think we are almost at the end of the workshop. Something, I mean, I've realized from the question Q&A and a lot of discussion around the KTN experience, how to bring academia and industry together, and I think there's a lot to learn from it. And interested to hear from Nijo that there's no when you did your benchmark, there's no like similar entity. And I think we are struggling here in Saudi Arabia to bring the academia with industry. And I think we need somebody to kind of connect us, connect the university with industry. I know there's a lot of university initiative, but I mean, universities are also busy in research and academia and teaching, and they have not enough time to kind of, and the connection and to do all these kind of connection. I think something KTN Saudi Arabia, where we bring universities and industry together through meetings, workshops, and discussing, putting agenda, strategies. Yeah. This would be something where, I mean, something to consider here as a conclusion of this, the first day of the workshop. And the other thing is, there's a lot to learn from the UK Innovate, their programs and initiatives. I think there's so many programs. Each program is very complicated with how they've been run. There's a lot of details. I think a 3 hours workshop is not enough, but and definitely need more sessions. And I agree with the idea of doing kind of MOU to kind of establish a joint program between UK and KSA, where we could, have scientists, companies from Saudi Arabia and UK could work together. Yeah.
No, Dr. Hani, that's really, thank you for such a positive, conclusive remark to the session. And I think there's a lot that we can do here. So really, really enjoy the session and our conversation as well. I can only say, please join us in thanking our speakers, who most of them are not with, not with us at the moment, but Hamish is still here. And I'm looking forward to our second workshop on the 8th of March. I think everyone here will be shared the information by Poonan on the registration. So again, thank you so much for your time and all your contribution today. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to all the speakers on behalf of the ministry here, and Dr. Nasser and the Vice Minister, His Excellency. Thank you to all the speakers and their organizers. Really enjoyed the workshop, and we look forward for the 8th of March for the second workshop. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye-bye, everyone.